Hello, everyone. So we're going to get started here. My name is Sean Gordon. I am a certified level 1 thermographer, SUS certified thermographer. I do our aerial operations for Simpson Gumperton Hager, an engineering firm based out of Boston. My colleague Chris Gray is also a certified level 1 thermographer and is a senior project engineer. A little louder? Okay. A little too short for this microphone. There we go. This session on drone applications in the building industry, we're going to take a high-level look on how our firm is using drones and a more detailed look on how we're using thermal imaging to assess building performance. For those of you that may have been here for the prior presentation by AES, some of our slides will be discussing a similar concept, however, in a different industry and quite to a much smaller scale. I'll briefly be introducing our firm and explaining the type of work we do, discussing how we began using drones and how we are currently using them. My focus will be explaining on how we're implementing them to enhance our existing work and some of the complications surrounding that. Chris will then take a deeper dive into the engineering side of thermal imaging and show project-related examples. And we'll be sure to leave time at the end for some questions, if there are any. So SGH is, we're an engineering firm founded by 3 MIT professors over 60 years ago. We're headquartered in the Boston area with offices in major urban areas around the country and over 600 employees. Our focus is the design, investigation, and rehabilitation of existing structures and building enclosures. Our work spans multiple markets outside of just buildings, including science and defense, infrastructure, nuclear, and water and wastewater. As you can see, we're obviously not a drone company. We are an engineering firm that is supplementing our work with drones to improve our work when applicable, when the job actually calls for it. So, how our aerial operations began. My role in the company began about 13 years ago when I was hired to work in our small group in our Boston office called, in our headquarters and outside of Boston called Graphics. Our responsibility is essentially to support our engineers with anything visual in nature that wasn't drafting, including generating figures for reports, presentations, litigation work, structural photography, things like that. We saw a need to evolve our capabilities just to keep up and to, kind of keep busy and to provide useful services to our internal clientele. So we purchased our first drone, a Phantom II, in about 2015 with very minimal research. Didn't really know much about the technology or the regulations. It's exactly what it sounds. It was an impulse buy. We spent some time after that researching FAA restrictions, learning about Section 333, and I was petitioning heavily to get a pilot's license, paid for, but that didn't go so well, unfortunately. Still trying. No. Once Part 107 was established, my time was spent pretty much just mainly researching and evaluating ways that I could use drones to improve our firm's work product. I understood that this process was going to be slow, because everything pretty much is in a large firm like this, and it was going to blossom organically, and it would only work if I had the desire to put in the work and make it happen. So I acquired my Part 107 in July 2017 and began marketing internally to increase awareness within the company to try to get kind of people excited about it. Took a couple months and we got our insurance squared away in October, and we began regular work in 2018. We're going to start it in the winter, but if I could stay out of the cold for a little longer, I didn't mind that. So, seeing as the firm was providing high quality work for over 60 years, there have been many complications getting people to jump on board with a new technology. A lot of it stems from the need to change the thought process, so the potential drone use is considered early in the proposal phase instead of as an added cost. People look at this as just, if they're not familiar with it, they just look at it as an expense. So there's a stigma associated that assumes that something like this adds a lot to the project budget, when in fact it generally reduces cost or at the very least provides a better quality result at a similar price. Even with these complications, we've been fortunate enough to see pretty steady growth over the past couple of years. Personally, I've been overwhelmed with drone information, capabilities, flight programs, all sorts of, there's just so many things out there, as I'm sure you all know. So my focus, my realization is, well, I need to provide a service that will enhance the work product for our firm and for the work we provide to our clients. Everything that we know at SGH regarding drones is learned by me through mistakes, through trial and error, through research. It's all self-taught. So I'm the first to admit that I don't know everything when it comes to this. Like I said, we're an engineering firm. We're not a drone company. I make a point to keep evolving, keep learning, trying to learn new ways to better our work. And anybody that out there that does similar work, I would appreciate chatting about this after, and any suggestions, comments that you have, I would greatly encourage. So that led us to the realization, as I said, we need to focus our efforts on services that our engineers will find value, and that, like I said, narrow down our capabilities and services. So like many drone operators, site mapping for us was a starting point. It's easy to automate, provides a quick and valuable overview of a project site. We have a large group of civil engineers that we anticipated would be heavy users of this early on. Turns out they weren't. They didn't seem to think it provided much value for them at the time. I'm hoping still to convince them, getting closer. But we tested this and other uses out early on. We found it wasn't something that we were going to spend a ton of time on. So we still do them periodically, but we've decided we're not going to really focus our time and expenses on improving this. So this really led us to what we do the majority of now, which is visual condition assessments. Upwards of 90% of the drone-related work we do falls under visual condition assessments. It can be broken down into visual or thermal. Thermal is probably about 2/3 of the total condition assessments we do. It can be done for a variety of reasons, including historic restoration, structural evaluation, pre and post construction, pre-purchase surveys, binocular surveys, and any number of other assessments. Generally, what we're looking for is observations to help provide a building owner with a strategy for future maintenance or repair. Depending on the project, the level of detail required could be as much as hairline cracks. So, it varies quite a bit. As much as I would like to be out there on every job, and I feel like almost every job we do could benefit from a drone in some way, it's important for us as a firm to maintain the standard of care and the high level of the quality work we've been providing for 60+ years. So a drone will never replace a hands-on inspection if a hands-on inspection is in fact required. This can be a matter of life safety. That's what it comes down to. And because of this, some of our engineers are still very hesitant to use drones. So some of our typical operation procedures, depending on the project, obviously we need to file waivers, we need to, get authorizations. So we make sure, depending on where the project is, we have everything squared away for that. Really, though, the in-office coordination tends to be the most complicated aspect of my operation procedures. Working with hundreds of engineers, they all have their own deadlines and expectations, and those don't always go hand in hand with reality. Some people tend to think that they can ask me in the morning to do a project in downtown Boston, and I can do it by the afternoon. Sometimes I can, but usually not. Usually we need some sort of lead time. There's a mixed level of experience, so you gotta have to balance that a little bit, and it can get a little frustrating, but it's a learning curve, and we just have to keep teaching people. As the only current drone operator in our firm, I've made a very strong effort to establish safety standards. We are going to be training more operators or potentially hiring operators over the course of the next 6 to 12 months. And as the person that will be responsible for this growth, I need to be sure that our future operators are able to problem solve in a safe and efficient manner, and that we can maintain the same quality. So we don't want different operators performing different inspections. So. And it's essential for us to have these procedures in place to ensure a safe operation and compliance with the FAA. So most of our flights are generally automated. This improvement in data collection has proven to be the biggest selling point when pitching the use of a drone. The horizontal stuff is typically automated. The vertical stuff, as some of you may know, is a little more complicated to automate. There's some softwares out there that have been doing a better job with it, but it's still, in my opinion, not 100% reliable quite yet, and definitely not as easy as horizontal mapping is. Typical binocular surveys can be very painstaking. Now following the simple flight path, like the one on the top left here, we can do a similar survey without neck strain while capturing 100% of the building. Binocular surveys on a brick building, something like this, can be very easy to get lost, to lose your place if you go to make a note on a drawing. So capturing 100% of the building has assured that our engineers don't miss any observations, which is obviously very important. Sometimes we need real-time analysis. If we need quick results, we will provide the on-site engineer with their own tablet and add an additional team member as a visual observer, so we can get sort of instant answers. Technology has made it relatively simple to capture the data, which is great. The real focus for us, though, as I think a lot of people will reiterate, is anybody can really capture data or photos. It's really a matter of how you analyze the data. So, as I've mentioned, we tailor our work product to what our engineers need. Our most common deliverable is just simply a collection of images that we take and organize them into folders by elevation, floor, whatever makes the most sense based on the structure. On the right, there's a very funhouse mirror-looking example of a facade survey of around 130 photos run through an in-house program that we created that essentially allows you, it arranges the thumbnails in order, and it allows you to click on the thumbnail, blow it up to full size, add comments, add annotations. It's a very user-friendly interface that we can customize and adjust based on the project. If our intent is to do this in the beginning, we will customize the flight plan so we fly in a more controlled way, so it doesn't kind of come out looking like this. This was not the best example for this, but it was a relatively recent one. So this provides, like I said, a familiar and easy to use deliverable for the client. They see this version of their facade, they see their building, they can click on it and view any comments that our engineers have, any observations, any suggestions for repairs, any number of things like that we can adjust. So this is something we would do to replace a typical binocular survey where hands-on inspection is not part of our scope. This type of work will help our clients hone in on areas that might need some attention. We do several roof surveys, most of which are thermal. Chris will get into that quite a bit. These are almost automated, always automated for the most part. The first step in this process is creating a visual orthomosaic, as you see on the top left. We use this to sort of establish a baseline before we capture the thermal images. This will help us locate any thermal anomalies, any dirt, ponding water, anything like that. It's not a replacement for being on the roof, but we found this to be quite helpful as the first step in the process. On a few occasions, we are asked to create a point cloud, like on the bottom left here. They don't really do anything for inspection purposes. There are some ways you can use them for inspection, but for the most part, it's a nice deliverable, and it's great for reporting purposes. All right, so to dive in a little bit on thermal here, Chris has been on the forefront of thermal imaging at SGH for a number of years, about 8 years now. Prior to using drones, Chris and his staff would spend countless hours in the cold, lugging ladders on roofs to provide clients with valuable information about their buildings. Unfortunately, the cold is the best time to do this, so being in the Northeast, we've done a lot of these in some very cold weather. It's a time-consuming and potentially unsafe process, depending on the roof, depending on the conditions, the weather. So we did a few of these together, a few roof scans together with the drone. Some roofs that if he did by hand the old-fashioned way would take 4+ hours. We did some of them in 20, 30, 40 minutes. And after that, I would like to say I don't think he's ever looked back. I don't think he's done a hand scan since then. And none of his staff ever want to do a hand scan again, that's for sure. So he quickly saw the potential to provide our clients with a better service, saving them money and time, and just a safer environment for our staff as well. Some benefits are some complex roofs that were previously inaccessible by hand would have been required additional safety measures, tie-offs, things like that. We can now scan with relative ease. The improved imagery that we get, sort of this straight down image instead of like an angled image from a ladder or something like that. It allows us to provide a better quality report to our clients. We're able to create a thermal orthomosaic that we use to identify potential areas of concern. If necessary, which happens frequently, Chris will get into one of these examples as well, our engineers will suggest a roof opening to get a little bit deeper into what the underlying issue could be. And our deliverables vary quite a bit based on project. We actually have an in-house group called our digital lab group that works with us to basically program whatever we want. So if we can come up with something, we just try to stump them as much as we can, and they generate whatever it is that whatever crazy idea we come up with in our brain. It's their job to kind of figure out how to program and create that. So our deliverables are pretty much always evolving. We're just trying to do whatever we can to provide the best possible dynamic deliverable to our client in the most efficient and budgetary conscious way. So that's sort of our goal. Now Chris is going to jump into a deeper dive in some of the infrared applications that we work with on a regular basis.
How's this volume in the back? Good? Bad? All right. So as John mentioned, I'm a project manager for SGH. Been there about 8 years, and I'm on the facade consulting side. So my background is structural engineering, but our facade consulting group essentially works with architects and owners to diagnose building enclosure-related problems. We work on new buildings, helping architects design their enclosures and do all the detailing associated with that. So as you'll see in the next several slides, we're using thermal imaging on both sides of that scope, on both existing buildings and new buildings. And before I jump into it, there's one big example that we just recently did 4 or 5 months ago that really proved to a lot of people in our firm why we should be using drones for especially thermal imaging of roofs. And so this was a 46 building complex in a city. Every building was about 20 stories tall. We were actually contracted originally through the owner to help them design the roof replacement for all 46 buildings. And the interesting thing was that the choice that they made to actually replace all the roofs was based on a single infrared scan or handheld scan that a surveying company did for the owner. And so this company went out, they scanned all 46 roofs. They essentially said every roof is wet. You need to replace every roof on the complex. And so that's not a small amount of money. That was about an $18 million roof replacement project. So when we first got contracted with the owner, we asked them for those IR reports. And once we received them, it was pretty clear that we really couldn't use any of the data that was actually taken or given to us. So the reports essentially just had a roof plan, and there was just an arrow that pointed to the middle of the roof and said the whole roof is wet, and there were like 2 photos with every report. So for us, we couldn't really use that information that well. So we went back to the owner and said, we want to rescan all of the buildings. And originally the owner was kind of hesitant to do that, but we convinced them that they may not need to actually replace all 46 roofs, and that we didn't necessarily think that the IR scan reports that they got originally were correct. And so this project had a lot of challenges. First off, it's in a city that had a no drone policy everywhere in the city. It was in an airport flight path. It was literally across the river from a major airport. And there was a height restriction, of course, due to the flight path. So when we first started this, we thought this was going to be a no-go from the beginning with the drone. But once we dug into it further, we contacted the city. We told them what we wanted to do. We said if we wanted to hand scan all 46 buildings again, we estimated it would take us 15 nights. And that assumes that you get 15 good weather nights in a row, which would never happen. So it would probably take us over a month to get this actually done. So once we explained that to the city and explained our whole process of when we were going to do it, they got on board. And then as far as the flight path issue goes, we kind of got lucky in that aspect because the landing strip that lines up right with this complex just happened to be down for repair work. And so we had a very small window of time we could actually get in there and fly all 46 buildings. And we did all 46 buildings in 2 nights. And so, we took the data that we got from those scans. We went back to the owner, and the owner wasn't planning on doing all 46 buildings at once. They were going to do it phased, over a couple of years. And we were able to prioritize certain roofs based on those scans, which we would have not been able to do based on the IR reports that we had before. So the fact that we were able to, scan 46 buildings in 2 nights, compared to the 15 plus nights that it would have taken us to hand scan, I think shows the usefulness of the drone. No. They are going to replace all 46 just because they want to get them all kind of on a baseline, but they weren't all wet. So as far as kind of trends go, we're seeing thermal imaging being used more and more, especially on the enclosure side of things. ASHRAE did a study back in 2008 where they surveyed a whole bunch of buildings across the U.S. and essentially looked at insurance claims. And they found that approximately 70% of insurance claims for buildings came down to enclosure-related problems. And that's compared to, structural problems, mechanical problems. And so, there's been, just within the last 5 or 6 years, there's been a heightened, sense of everybody needs to focus on making sure the enclosure is properly constructed. And so one of the ways you can do that is by using QA/QC testing. And QA/QC testing is essentially any type of test you can do on the facade or on the building itself to confirm what's built is actually kind of what the owner originally wanted in the first place. And so thermal imaging falls into that category. So we're using infrared on a wide variety of uses or topics. And I'm going to go through each one of these quickly. But the first one is wet roofing. So this is mainly existing buildings. So a lot of times what our role is an owner contacts us because they're either A, being told by a roofing contractor that they need to replace their roof, they're reporting leakage through the roof, or the roof is just out of warranty and they think they need to replace it. And so we generally will perform a condition assessment of the entire roof system for them and make recommendations on how long we think the roof will last and when they think they need to replace it. And so one of the very first things we do on all of these now is do an infrared scan of the roof to see if we can determine how much water is in the roof. And it also allows us to pinpoint where we want to make openings, because a lot of these condition assessments require openings. We don't necessarily have drawings that show exactly what's there. So how this works is water can store heat much better than dry materials. So if you have saturated roofing insulation, when that is cooling, it will cool at a slower rate compared to adjacent dry materials because it stores that heat that it's absorbed throughout the day longer than anything that's dry. And so typically when we're performing these, we're doing them at night. We, as Sean mentioned, we'll go out about an hour before sunset. We'll scan the roof with a digital camera just to get that baseline. And then about an hour or 2 hours after sunset, sometimes 3 or 4, depending on the roof type, we'll do the thermal imaging of the roof after the fact. And so what you're generally looking for is exactly what you see on the screen here. You're looking for kind of warmer spots around the roof that are indicative of moisture within the roofing assembly. And so one of the things, there's a lot of interpretation that has to happen because these warm spots can be caused by a whole slew of other issues. But drones have actually, and one of those issues is reflections. So when you're looking through a handheld IR camera, surfaces that are reflective, such as metal panel and just walls in general, will reflect heat back down onto the roof, and you'll see that in the IR camera. By using the drone, you can get higher, you're more vertical on the roof, and it kind of minimizes a lot of the issues that we have with handheld. And so ultimately what we try to get to, or our end goal for these IR scans is to ultimately get something like this, a fully stitched radiometric image of the entire roof. This is pretty problematic. It's been problematic so far. This is probably the best one that we have. Because stitching radiometrics, if anybody knows, is a difficult thing that a lot of companies haven't figured out yet. And some companies that have figured it out yet, it doesn't work that well. And so one of the other issues that we have with this is once it's fully stitched, temperatures also change as you're doing the scan. Because remember, we're doing it an hour after sunset. Everything's cooling at a very rapid rate. So if you start scanning on this side, by the time you get to this side, things could be a couple degrees cooler. And then when you go to stitch that at the end of the flight, the programs need to account for that somehow. And a lot of times we're not necessarily focused on the temperatures that we're seeing when we get these images. We're looking for patterns. And so from our standpoint, I don't really care what the temperatures are. All I care about is getting like the pretty photo at the end that I can look at and see the thermal anomalies. So generally what we're doing now, where we can't fully stitch roofs, roof images, we're mainly just taking kind of the smaller shots that we have and get throughout the mapping, and we'll associate them with certain areas on roof plans, and then that'll help us identify where we want to make roof cuts, and then we'll make those roof cuts afterwards, and hopefully you don't see a bunch of water in your roof. So I mentioned we do it on new buildings as well, and this ties back to that kind of QA/QC thing, kind of method that you can help prevent building issues long term. So a lot of times, thermal scans of roof systems on new buildings are becoming almost industry standard for every project, and some authorities like the Mass School Building Authority, which is a state department, they require it now on all of their projects. It's one of these things where it's not like a pass-fail test, but you can look at it and you can determine whether or not you think there's water on the roof. And contractually, a lot of roofing contractors are now tied to this test or to the scan, and they're actually required to go back and open literally every area that we flag as a potential issue. And that's what you're seeing here. And a lot of people may think that you do a new roof, you won't have water under it, and that is certainly not the case. There's a lot of things that go into re-roofing a building, and water can get into new roofing systems in a wide variety of ways. So the next one, kind of moving to walls. The first kind of most basic wall scan that you can do is looking for missing wall insulation or thermal bridging. And we don't do these ones alone that often, mainly because common wall systems now are mostly cavity wall systems, so they're drained. They have some sort of air cavity behind the cladding that you see. And that air cavity really skews pretty much any effect that you'll be able to kind of see as far as thermal bridging goes and or missing insulation, because the insulation is usually tucked back behind that air cavity. So that air cavity, which is usually vented, is just prevents you from using IR to try to see missing insulation. Doesn't mean you can't do it on every building or certain buildings, but just to give you an idea of what you're looking at, the top right is a cold storage facility. So we're starting to see a lot of existing buildings being converted to cold storage facilities. And if anybody knows anything about cold storage facilities, they're generally just kind of like prefab insulated metal panels that they smush together with some sealant. And generally, it's not the best performing kind of wall system that you can get. And so that's what you're seeing here in the top right is just air and air leakage essentially through panel joints and thermal bridging through the joints as well. Bottom right is just cladding attachment supports. So that's a thin stone veneer on a building. And so there's metal cladding, there's metal attachments that actually anchor the stone back. And so all you're seeing there is the thermal bridging that bisects through the insulation to the backup wall. And then on the left is kind of a unique one that we recently did. We actually pressurized this building, which I'll get into in a little bit. But when we first scanned it without pressure, we saw all these thermal anomalies kind of around these spandrel areas. And come to find out, the building was overclad. There was an existing building beneath that new skin. And so there was a big gap between the new cladding and the old building that we just had no idea what was going on in there. And so, there's something going on because you can clearly see there's a whole bunch of thermal bridging that's happening. And when we pressurized the building, we didn't see any difference in those, so it has to be thermal bridging. And one of the aspects, Sean kind of alluded to it, a lot of the standards require you to essentially make test cuts and confirm that what you're identifying as anomalies in your thermal reports are actually defects in the building. So in our report for this, we're essentially recommending that they open and take some panels off to see what's actually behind there to confirm what's causing that anomaly. But the owner didn't want to do that in this case, so now we're just left to kind of, hypothesize what it is. So then really the big one is a pressure test of a building. And these are kind of the most dramatic IR shots, I think, that you get when you're doing thermal imaging of buildings. But they can be kind of complex because you got to pressurize the building. And I'll get into pressurizing in a little bit. But the idea is that you scan the entire building once, without any pressure whatsoever, and then you pressurize the building either positively or negatively, and then scan the building again. So if you're positively pressurizing, you would scan from the outside, usually with a drone or handheld. If you're negatively pressurizing, you would scan from the inside just with a handheld. Or if you have the drone that can bounce into walls and things like that, then you could use that. But generally what you're looking for are just differences. Again, similar to the roof, you're looking for, temperature differences. And so something like this on the bottom left here is representative of this transition between some curtain wall glazing system framing and an adjacent brick wall. And so, when we see air leakage and anomalies that look like this, we know for sure that that's indicative of air leakage coming from the interior to the exterior. And so that means that somebody missed a seal at that one location. Similarly, you have, something in the middle of a wall that wasn't there under no pressure. You know that there's some sort of defect in the backup areas of the wall system. And then roof transitions are notorious for being problematic areas because you've got multiple subcontractors that are coming together, and they just seem to be forgotten about on a lot of projects. So whenever you pressurize a building, that's usually where we see a lot of issues. And so here's just a couple more shots to kind of show. This was one building, by the way, it was a brand new school. So you can see new buildings certainly have a lot of issues as well. Then specific to glass, this was actually another building that we were scanning, not looking for glass defects, but we ended up seeing this as we were scanning the building. And what you're seeing is a reduction in R value in the insulated glass unit. And typically you don't scan glass with an infrared camera because it's so reflective. So if you look at glass with an infrared camera, like right on, you will just see your direct reflection right in there. But when the glass units start losing argon gas or the air that's between the two pieces of glass, you can start getting temperature differences between different units. And so there was a wide variety of kind of not failures per se because they weren't fogging, and mainly because it was a brand new building. But if I was to put money on which units may fog first in the future, it would definitely be these. And this was one of these things where nobody expected to see this when we scanned the building, and it kind of threw a wrench into the whole project. But the owner ended up just accepting it as is. So. And then Paver, concrete delamination. This is kind of a unique one that we stumbled upon more recently. We had a client that asked us to scan a big plaza, a very uniquely shaped plaza, and the reason they asked us to scan was mainly because somebody just on the architectural team just went out with a handheld IR camera and started seeing things, and they didn't actually know what it meant. And so we dug into it a little more, and then we actually went out and scanned the whole plaza, and they were worried about debonded plaza pavers, and so that's what you're seeing here. So these three pavers here correlate to these three pavers here. So you can see the difference. This paver is almost fully bonded. This one's, mostly bonded or, minimally bonded, and then this one is kind of somewhere in the middle. So what you're seeing is based on thermal mass. So when the paver was fully set in the setting bed, it's connected to the actual setting bed, which is a huge, essentially a large bed of concrete that anchors the pavers down. And so when that heats up during the day, as long as it's connected to the paver, when it starts cooling down, you'll start seeing all of that, the thermal radiation coming up through the pavers. And then similarly, if it's not bonded, you can see that it's a little cooler than the adjacent ones. And so what we ended up providing the owner on this project was a fully laid out, plan of the plaza, and we're very easily able to, identify which kind of rows had issues. And then, you take it a step further, you can set this up so that you click on a row and it brings up all the representative images that the drone took. And we actually hand scanned this plaza as well, but to go through the level of effort and tying everything to kind of a PDF that then you can then click and get the images would be very difficult to do by hand scanning. So having the drone, having GPS coordinates and knowing exactly where it was at all times made things a lot easier for the end result. One of the big takeaways that I try to give in most of these talks is There's industry standards for almost anything out there, and that applies specifically to thermal scanning. We don't always perform scans on the projects that we're on. Sometimes we're reviewing reports from other either drone companies or other engineering firms that do these scans. And it's pretty amazing to me that there's some drone companies out there that will go out and buy an infrared camera and offer that as a service and just scan a building or a roof, and they actually have no idea what they're looking at. And it's a big problem because we've had this happen before where, we have to rely on a report, and that report gives us false data. We had a different one from the one that I talked about earlier, where an owner, in a similar situation, they were thinking about replacing their roof, and a drone company went out, scanned the roof, gave them a report, flagged a bunch of issues. Come to find out, they had no idea these industry standards existed. They scanned at the completely wrong time. They scanned in the middle of the morning, so as the sun was rising, you were getting UV radiation on the roof, and they were claiming that some of the areas were issues and wet insulation when it actually wasn't. It was just the sun coming up and hitting those areas. So these industry standards are critical to knowing how to actually perform these scans, because if you do it incorrectly, you just get data that doesn't mean anything to anybody, and whoever just paid you to do it just wasted a whole ton of money. So some of the factors that affect thermal scans, there's a whole slew of other factors, but these are the main ones, and I'm focusing mainly on roofs because a lot of our work deals with roofs. A lot goes into scanning walls in full buildings, but compared to roof scans, which can be relatively quick. And I'll go through each one of these. So the first one is Vantage Point, and this actually goes to why we're switching to drones for almost all of our roof scans to begin with. So as Sean mentioned, the older way that we did these scans was you used a handheld camera. Anybody that's messed with one of these handheld cameras, there's a 15-degree field of view essentially from the camera. And so if you imagine you're just standing over a roof, looking down at the roof with the camera, a 15-degree view does not buy you a whole lot of area to actually look at. And so that's what you're seeing in the left. And the problem with that is you could be potentially standing in a big area of wet insulation and not know you're actually in an area of wet insulation because you're not seeing the temperature difference between the wet area and the dry area. So typically what we do, or what we were doing, was bringing ladders, 6 to 8 foot ladders with us that we would lug around the roof. We'd put it up, we'd do 360-degree shots, we'd move the ladder another 20 feet this way, do the same thing, and we just march around the roof. And so, it was a very time-extensive exercise to hand scan these. And so if you take that same 15-degree range that you have with the handheld and you apply it to a drone, you've instantly increased your field of view, exponentially. And so that's where we're seeing the biggest benefit, is really just being able to capture larger areas at once. And as Sean mentioned, the drone program at our firm kind of was a test run. We were just figuring things out as we went. And when we first bought the drone, Sean and I went out and scanned a bunch of buildings just to kind of get the feeling down. And one of the things that none of the standards really tell you out there is, what height should you be flying at to get the best results. And this was kind of just a test run where we went above a building. This is our office, or our old office. And we just, kept increasing elevation to see if things changed as we got higher. And as you can imagine, the resolution isn't changing. So as you get higher, the less quality that you're going to get from your image. But we generally found that with 50 to 100 feet above a roof, generally gets you the best imagery. And so usually what we do when we're doing a roof is we'll go out and we'll map the entire roof at 50 to 100 feet. In our very regimented mapping program, so you can get the stitching afterwards. And then once we're done that, we'll go and fly at 300 or 400 feet and just get overall shots. And we'll quickly process the overall shots to see if there's anything we need to get onto the roof afterwards to look at. One of the other, probably the biggest factor that can affect results is the environment itself. Thermal scans are essentially a direct function of what kind of environment you're scanning in. So the ASTM standards that I listed on, a couple slides ago, they have some recommended / requirements for, minimums to perform each of these scans. But you can see, the one that I've highlighted here, they kind of just punt on that one and say, varies depending on assembly. So that really leaves it open to whoever's performing the scan to know what they're doing, so that they know that they should be, or know that they need to perform it under very specific good conditions. So as I mentioned, we're doing a lot of these at night. We need daytime to nighttime temperature swings. If you don't get that cooling effect at night, the scan's not going to be effective. Daytime weather, usually you're not looking for, there can't be any water on the roof because water is reflective and it will just skew any result. You won't be able, the scan will be essentially ineffective at areas of water. And then wind can also affect the scan as well. Along those same lines of environmental factors, especially during the wintertime in the Northeast, can be a problem for us. If the temperature of the roof surface drops below the dew point in the air, you're going to get dew on the roof, and that water, essentially treat it like ponded water, it skews all the results across the entire roof. So, when we were hand scanning, this happened quite a bit, and you essentially have to pack up and go home and try again another day, another night. In some cases, it's actually made it easier because if you're hovering if the whole roof is hovering, or the dry areas are hovering below the dew point, but the wet areas, which are in theory warmer than the dry areas, are hovering still above the dew point, you won't actually get dew where there's wet insulation, which is what you're seeing on the top photo. So you could theoretically just walk around the roof and look for areas where there's no dew, and you'd know where the wet insulation is on the roof. And then one of the other big ones is roof types. Like every roof's a little different. And really what's critical for this, for a scan to be successful, is that the roof is insulated. And what I mean by that is there's some sort of waterproofing or roof membrane, and then there's insulation below that can absorb water. Because if you're scanning a roof, this in theory relies on the water being absorbed into materials to make those materials saturated. And so, we've generally had great success with the single-ply roof systems, the EPDMs and TPOs, and so those are the majority of the roofs that we scan because that's mostly what's being used on new buildings. We've had moderate success with built-up roofs, so if anybody doesn't know what a built-up roof is, it's usually kind of like a hot mop asphalt with a bunch of gravel above it. In a lot of locations in the U.S., you can't even build those types of roofs anymore, so we've had moderate success with those, though, and then we've had poor success with inverted assemblies. So that's, like a plaza assembly where you have waterproofing on a deck with some sort of insulation above it. And then asphalt shingle roofs that are interior insulated, because if you think about that, you need the insulation to absorb water. And usually there's an underlayment or a membrane below the shingles that prevents you from kind of seeing below that. And then I have ballasted roof systems highlighted mainly because prior to having the drone, we had that considered into the poor success category. And a lot of that is because gravel varies in thickness along the roof. And if you remember the thermal mass that I was talking about with the plaza assembly, the thicker the gravel, the warmer it's going to be, and the slower it's going to cool down at night. And so what you'd essentially see is what you're seeing here, where you have thick areas of gravel, and then you have thinner areas of gravel. And that makes it look like there's an issue there, but it's not actually an issue. It's just heavier gravel. And the temperature differences aren't really enough to kind of make it muted across the image, especially with a handheld. But as soon as you get it on a drone, those temperature differences get muted quite a bit, and you don't see the variations in the gravel, and you essentially get what you're looking at up here, which is you're only seeing the anomalies, you're not seeing thicknesses and variations in the gravel. And then interpreting the data is pretty critical. As Sean mentioned, we're engineers. We're on a lot of these projects that we're scanning. And especially the new ones where we're involved through design, construction. We're out there multiple times a week looking at construction work that's going on. And so when you're scanning a wall, you could go hire a drone company to scan a wall, or a building. But having intimate knowledge of how the building is constructed, I think, is a big benefit for us, because we can eliminate some of the things that we're seeing as potential issues based on what we know about the enclosure. And so this is just an example where, we pressurize this building, and you can see that there's a random warm spot that popped up. And this was ended up just being a transition between, cladding systems that you see down here. And then, we actually ended up going back to our construction photos, and we found, there actually is, a complex transition here. We have multiple trades coming together, and something was probably missed. But if you didn't have that knowledge when you're doing the scan, or even after the scan, you would essentially just be providing your client, a marked up elevation saying, we think there's something here. And based on this, we're typically recommending they pull cladding off to, repair things like this. But I think that's whoever's doing scans needs to be able to interpret, or should be able to interpret the scans as they're going as well. And then I mentioned building pressurization previously. This is a kind of a big coordination item up front if you're going to scan a building using thermal imagery. And if you're looking for air leakage, you essentially need to do this. And it's not possible on every building. So every mechanical system on every building is slightly different. Some new buildings that we've scanned, there's just a mechanical contractor on site with a laptop plugged into the mechanical system, and he pushes go, and the thing pressurizes the whole building in like 5 minutes. But that is an anomaly. We've had that happen once, and usually there's a long process to pressurizing a building. Usually the facilities guys and the mechanical guys on site need to go around and close dampers and exhausts, and sometimes we're taping off exhausts, and so there can be a lot of coordination that goes into actually making sure the building is pressurized. And I don't think I mentioned it before, but the reason we pressurize, so you have thermal bridges, which are just essentially things like steel studs and cladding attachment systems that go completely through the insulation layer. And so that transmits heat from the interior to the exterior. The other side of it is air leakage. And the only way we can tell in thermography the difference between the two is by pressurization. If the temperatures change under pressure, you know that it's due to air leakage. If they don't, you know that it's just a thermal bridge. And so, the one example on this photo is here. So this is like a top of a window frame. And so, we were negatively pressurized or zero pressure. You go to positive pressure, and it's generally within the same temperature. But then you look up at, an area up here that had some vents, and you can tell that the temperature is changing between those two pressurizations. So. And then lastly, post-processing is really, I think we've shifted a lot of our work. So compared to handheld, we would be processing essentially in the field with the handheld camera, whereas drones, we're now going out, we're taking a ton of images and then either dumping them onto a laptop while we're still at the building or coming back to the office and processing them back at the office. So it's decreased the amount of time that it takes us to actually scan buildings, but the post-processing portion of it has kind of increased exponentially, mainly because we're taking, exponentially more photos too. Where we'd hand scan a building, maybe we have a couple hundred photos. You use a drone to map that same building or that roof area, and you may have over 1,000 photos. So, luckily Flare just came out with a program that lets you batch process everything. So that's awesome. But, up until that point, we were manually going in and adjusting each photo. And so generally for work product, this is what we end up with. We end up with kind of, reports with lots of photo pages that go around the building, and we compare areas to our digital scan and mark all the thermal anomalies on the scans. And then similarly with walls, we're usually doing kind of no pressure photos with pressure photos. And then just a quick kind of conclusions, and then we can open it up for questions. I think we'll have like 5-6 minutes left. So these are pretty broad conclusions, but are summary items. So the use of drone in building enclosures and in the construction industry, it's a very cost-effective tool for us as engineers to kind of determine whether or not buildings have issues in a pretty quick manner. There can be substantial upfront work, as Sean discussed. We have a lot of waivers. We're doing 99% of these thermal scans at night. Things like some airports actually shut down at night, so getting waivers close to airports isn't always an issue. But there's a lot of upfront work that goes into it that not a lot of people in our firm understand, and it's tough to get them to understand that. As Sean mentioned, a lot of people think that they can just go to him and say, we need to scan this building tonight, but that's not the case in a lot of places, especially in high urban areas. And then as far as thermography goes, or infrared thermography, we're using it almost solely now. We rarely have or even use the handheld camera, mainly because it's so much quicker and it provides a better worked product for everybody involved. And we still end up having to get on the roofs typically at night, but if you can imagine carrying a camera around, walking, looking at the camera and trying to take notes and things like that, it's just not generally a safe environment for people to be on a roof in the middle of the night with no lights. So being on the ground, operating the drone has just become a much better tool for us. And then as far as engineering judgment goes, again, there's several industry standards out there that provide good guidance for performing these tests. But generally, most of these scans require some sort of judgment, and you're either giving it to somebody after the fact to analyze your photos that you take, or if you're that person, you can analyze them yourself. But one of the big things is that verification's always necessary. Every single one of those ASTM standards essentially says, just because you see an anomaly in the IR camera doesn't mean you should report it as an anomaly. You should report it and recommend and require testing is done after the fact to actually confirm what you're seeing in the camera. So with that, we'll open it up to questions.
My name's Kaylee Hope. I am a professor at the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism. I teach a class on Part 107 certification for video journalists, and I'm also a drone pilot myself. And I'm here today with these guys to talk a little bit about how drones are being used in public safety. And so I'll just introduce them a little bit. There are a couple changes on the panel. So Darshan unfortunately had to leave unexpectedly, so he's not here today. And we're also missing Riley, who might come at some point. But we have Michael Lecklater, is that how I say it? From the Corona Fire Department. And we also have Tim Martin from the Los Angeles County Regional Training Center. David Martell from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. And Matthew Slauson from the Torrance Police Department. So to kick things off before we launch into our discussion, I'm just going to play a brief video that'll that highlights some of the ways that drones are being used in public safety, and we'll go from there.
One of the big problems with hurricanes in North Carolina is the amount of flooding that we get and all the damage that comes along with that.
We got a hurricane coming. We got drones. How can we help?
We decided that the first thing to do after a hurricane passes is to start getting our drone teams deployed. We want people to get back on the roads. We want our transportation system to be running smoothly.
There was a massive effort. 15 teams were deployed all over North Carolina during and after the hurricane. They set up a command center within Division Aviation. It was a 7 to 10 day process.
On Monday, when the skies finally cleared, we were hitting the ground running. And that week, we flew over 250 missions with drones.
We were able to direct aid into certain areas that needed them rapidly. We're also able to present live video back to the command center. State leaders were able to make calls and look at different areas of flooding.
I-40, a major corridor in our state, 3 miles of it was underwater.
We had power outages. Some part of our cities were disconnected because the interstate was shut because of the flooding.
We would share that live feed with basically the decision makers in downtown Raleigh, and then eventually had to shut the road down. But we were able to plan ahead to say, okay, we need to find another artery through Lenore County because the water's coming.
Our general public, through news and media, were able to see all the coverage that the drones were providing during the hurricane relief. They were able to provide real-time feed on the state of their property, their belongings, instantly, versus we've got to wait a few days or hopefully somebody will fly over and capture a glimpse of where we live. They were able to direct teams into certain areas, and we were able to gather that data and provide it instantly.
The perception of the use of drones has changed dramatically because we're able to use it as a tool and really educate the public. We're also able to use it as a tool to help rescue folks that were stranded, and we're able to use it to help assess our transportation corridors and infrastructure, and ultimately allow folks to get back into those affected communities.
We are witnessing a rebirth of aviation through unmanned aviation.
I think that it really opened the door for a positive spotlight for the state.
Great. So that video actually came from Darshan, who's not here today. But why don't we, before I launch into my questions, any initial reactions or thoughts from the panel on that video? No?
I think, is this on? Can you hear me? Like many things we do, things like this, the hurricanes come up and the fires in California, and we don't have experience in this. So a lot of this stuff is going out there and doing it, learning it, taking the chances, and then coming back and producing stuff like this really helps everyone else that's out there that needs the references. Early on in the development of all of our programs, we didn't have these references to go to, so now it's a lot easier for us to develop these programs, learn from videos like this and their experiences to bring back to what we have to offer.
Great, great. And I want to talk a bit about, how drones are being used in enforcement and how they can really help officers do their job. But kind of before we launch into that, since this video kind of was looking at emergency response, and we're also now dealing with, another hurricane and potentially more emergency response, how are drones particularly effective with confronting, natural disasters or dealing with emergency response?
I can touch on that.
Yeah.
One thing with the disaster recovery response is they're really aiding and making it a lot faster for the infrastructure to get back up and running. For example, the telecommunications companies are really taking advantage of the drones, and they're sending drones out to do surveys and determine what cell sites might be damaged, what lines are down, and it's just that much quicker and more efficient for it to be done by drones than sending out crews, which may not be able to access those certain areas. So in that aspect, it's huge.
Great. And Michael, you specifically work in the area of fire, right?
Yes.
So maybe you can talk a little bit about how you're using drones.
So one of the issues that we have with fighting like wildland fires in particular, that's where there's definitely going to be, I think, one of the more pronounced uses, is we always see on TV the big fires where things are burning through the mountains and you can see where the fire's going. One of the issues that has always threatened the fire department is those flatland fires where you can't see the depth. It's burning into brush, trees. So having eyes in the sky, giving some intel to actually give you a sense of where things are at is huge.
Great.
You guys able to hear that? All right. How's that? Hey. All right, try again. So in the firefighting realm, it's the wildland firefighting that we definitely see more use cases being probably the most beneficial. We always see on TV these wildland fires that are burning through the mountains. That when fire's going up and down terrain, you can see where it is. Our struggles are when fires are in flat grounds, when they're in river bottoms, they're in fields, brush. We can't really see what is burning, how far in it's burning. All we see is the column of smoke. So getting something up in the air that can actually tell us where we need to go, where our ingress points or egress points is going to definitely enhance our ability to respond both with speed and safety.
Great. And just to follow up on that a little bit, are there examples of when you've been able to use drones to respond more effectively to fires?
So unfortunately, we haven't had a chance to use them on fires. We have done a couple little sample test flights simply because our drone program is fairly new and fire season is here now, but I imagine in a month or two we'll probably know exactly how it works.
Great.
I can tell you what they're doing in California now after some of the bigger fires is they're going out now and they're mapping and they're using thermal imaging. They're finding areas of brush that need to be cleared. They're trying to do fire abatement mapping. They're mapping areas that are potential burn areas, and they're having that on file. In the California fires especially, it wasn't law enforcement, it wasn't firefighters that went out and did all the after mapping. It was civilians, it was agricultural companies that have all this experience in 3D mapping. They came in and now they're teaching us how to go out there and do this stuff preemptively so they can get back to their focus, which is agricultural. So we're learning from the private sector how to do our job better and do these mappings. And it's natural disasters too. If they know an area is going to flood or be devastated by hurricanes, they're going out and 3D mapping it. And then after the area is flooded, they're taking the mapping that they had before and they're putting it on top of the flood area so they can actually find addresses and they can find where these houses are when everything's underwater.
Great, thank you. And so moving a little bit on from that, David, let's move on to you and talk a little bit more about how drones are being used with police and enforcement. So how is your department using drones, and how does it help officers better do their job and keep them safe?
So with our department, we have 6 aircraft. So we have 1 in traffic, 1 in our force investigative unit. They investigate our officer-involved shootings, CSI, search and rescue, and then we also have armor for SWAT. We're actually testing some aircraft for indoor use when it comes to SWAT. So that helps us out a lot. So we don't have to send officers into a house or a building. We can send the drone in first, try to find the suspect, and make contact with them. Because we actually have one now that we used actually a couple weeks ago. Found the suspect in the bedroom, landed the drone, and had a nice little conversation right there with the suspect. Our negotiators did. They didn't have to throw in a phone. They didn't have to put officers in the house or anything. We just used the aircraft to go in there. Another way is, you know, 1 October happened. So after that, we have a lot of outdoor events here, a lot. So pretty much on all the outdoor events, we're flying Overwatch for them with our aircraft, providing live feed into our command post. A lot has happened since we started doing that. We actually get to see more telescopes, spotting scopes up in windows of buildings, and we're able to pinpoint where they are, and we can actually send officers up to those rooms and make contact to see what's going on, see if we need to take more action with it. Everybody's been really receptive to it since 1 October for us. They love the fact that we deploy them. I'll be at NASCAR here, I think next weekend, and we have a major outdoor event. So that's how we're doing it. It's making our officers safer, and just like the fire, we can actually go up, pinpoint where egress or ingress for our officers can be too, and also medical. So we're teaming up with medical also. So we can actually tell them, hey, we have a victim over here, and we can guide them into the victim a lot easier too.
Great. And Tim, you had mentioned also that that your department has used drones quite a bit to confront things, you know, not putting officers basically in that situation. I think there was a story about a stolen car or something. You want to tell us about that?
So my full-time job is Huntington Beach Police Department, and we have a pretty robust program. We have 11 aircraft and 8 officers that are on the team as an ancillary assignment. The incident you're referring to is a stolen car. Suspect would not get out of the car. he essentially held our officers at bay for approximately half hour. They did negotiations in several different languages through the car speaker. He wouldn't get out of the car. At that point, it's do we force him out of the car using other devices such as pepper ball, 40 mil, or even a canine. We sent our DJI Mavic Enterprise with the speaker up there, flew it right up to his door, and using the speaker system, we essentially just talked to the guy. We said, hey man, this is what's going to happen. You got to come out of the car. We're going to use force against you. We're going to shoot you with this or that. We're going to send a dog in. Do us a favor and just open the door with your right hand. Step out of the car with your hands up. As soon as we had the drone up there right next to his door, he immediately came out of the car. The drone was used to negotiate him back to the officers until they took control of him. So it was a very effective way to de-escalate the call and get him to come out using probably something he's never been exposed to.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I feel like there's no technology or anything that's ever been like that, right? That's sort of been able to be that mediator between like a scary situation and an officer dealing with it.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Was that a pre-recorded message, or were you able to talk back and forth?
So you have the option to do both. You can either pre-record messages, so if you have a standard announcement, a canine announcement, or a dispersal order, you can record up to a minute and have that stored in your device. But you can also do a live recording up to a minute. So in that case, it was a live recording, and based on his actions, we would record a new message.
Great. And Matthew, I want to bring you into the conversation too. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you're using drones as far as
Sure.
enforcement?
Absolutely. So we have a 12-person team at our department from Torrance PD, which is about 20 miles south of LA, if you're not familiar with where it's at. We have about 9 aircraft. We've incorporated into patrol as well. So those of us who are on the drone team who are on patrol will take a drone with us in the trunk. And basically, if there's any call that a drone would be helpful, then we'll deploy it. A couple of the highlights we had over the past couple of years, one particular one was we helped a neighboring department right near LAX, and this individual had gotten a shootout with police officers there in Inglewood. He had barricaded himself up on the roof of a building, still with the gun, and the problem was it was in such close proximity to the airport that the police helicopter wasn't actually able to get in there. And we were able to coordinate with the FAA and get the drone in there at about 50 feet. So we were literally under the airliners by a couple hundred feet, and we were able to use the drone to keep an eye on him, and we were sending the video back to the command post. So that's just an example of how powerful they can be.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you mentioned that required some coordination with the FAA. So my next question was kind of like, this is great, but what are the limitations, or like what are some of the challenges given the regulations and the fact that we can't fly beyond visual line of sight? How is that impacting the ability to use these devices for public safety? We'll just open that up to anyone.
Sure, I can take a stab at it. First, it's constantly changing. The FAA is doing a good job of doing the best they can. They got their hands full, and there's only so many FAA employees to be able to help out in this scenario. Their primary goal is manned aviation, but I guess what I'm saying is it's always changing. So just be fluid with it. It has been challenging. We are able, as public safety, to get drones into areas where they need to go that are controlled airspace through certain procedures. So it's always changing. It might be new next year, but they're very helpful with us, and they understand the public safety mission.
Okay.
So the visual line of sight is the biggest challenge for us, and flight over people. But the visual line of sight is the definition and what is that exactly is still really non-committal as far as what we can do to establish that line of sight. Can we use a person from an elevated position to be our VO so that we can go from a fixed point to behind a building into a backyard if we're searching for somebody? Because technically, as soon as you go behind a tree, behind smoke in a fire, behind a building, you violated that part of 107. We're looking at using an Overwatch aircraft over our aircraft that's going behind our building as a visual. So you're using another team, another VO to be your visual observer of that aircraft while it goes into a backyard. You're talking flying 20 feet off the ground. You're not talking about 400 feet in the air, a mile out where you've completely lost sight of the aircraft. FAA is very reasonable in that aspect, and that's why it's super critical when you go through an operation. You have a operation plan. You have those things planned out rather than just when they come do your ramp check and they ask you, okay, what was your plan to fly this aircraft beyond line of sight? You got to have a plan and be able to answer those questions.
See, we've been very fortunate here in Vegas. We've actually got the FAA, air traffic control, and all involved in our program from the get-go. So when we first started meeting, they were always at our meeting. They've helped us out tremendously. We don't fly under a COA. We fly under all Part 107s. So we have all the airspace waivers here, and pretty much anywhere in Vegas, you're in Class B airspace, either from McCarran or Nellis. And then we have North Las Vegas and all. So our biggest issue is to be on visual line of sight along with flying over people. Now, I fly New Year's Eve every year. The way that we do that is we block off the whole center part. I don't know if anybody's been here for New Year's Eve, but we block off that center part of the Las Vegas Boulevard. That's all ours. Pedestrian guards and everything's there. So it's all our individuals there, and that's where we fly, is up and down the middle of there. We always get up to 200 feet, and then we have to actually team up with other agencies that fly their helicopter over the strip. So we work very well with everybody. The FAA is always there. They come out all the time to our events, especially our outdoor events. You can call it the ramp check, or they actually just come out and find out what we're doing and how we're doing it and ask a whole bunch of questions. So that's how we do some stuff. The Overwatch stuff is the flying over people. That's the toughest one for me, especially downtown. It's pretty hard.
It's hard to avoid flying over people, right?
No, we don't fly over people. It's just hard to actually, if a call's on one end, I have to tell them I can't get over there because I have to fly over people. So it's,
Right.
We pick an area over by El Cortez that it's all buildings there. So we fly over the buildings.
And do you have, I guess we could talk a lot about the technological advancements that might, make that easier to do, but do you have any sense of, what the future might look like to make those things more possible?
There's actually the parachute systems that are coming out that there's been quite a few agencies that have gotten the waiver for flying over people. The issue that we have is the aircraft that we fly. Most of them are towards the DJI products. We don't fly DJI products. We fly Unique and Autel. They're not yet capable of having those on there. So we're working on it. Hopefully we can get the system. Once we do, then we can work on our waiver. But until then, our hands are kind of tied.
Right.
So we fly, our primary aircraft is the Enterprise, and that is what the 17 waivers for the parachute system has been issued for. So we're going for that parachute system to make it, and really the sense of it is any aircraft you put out in public safety, I think that's the future. Looking at the future of public safety aircraft is parachutes. And if they're not integrated into the aircraft already, it's something that will be put on their aftermarket. And we also fly under 107 only. So that is the direction that we will go.
Great. Anything to add?
I say the fire department has the same issues. Our probably biggest challenge is that beyond line of sight, especially for us in our city. We have a lot of lost hikers, and if someone goes up and hikes on a hot day, didn't bring enough water, or they were biking and they fell, broke an arm, broke a leg, and it's very, very complex terrain, multiple trails, very steep elevation changes, and sometimes just flying from where you as a pilot would naturally set up, going up some of these canyons, there's just no way to physically set yourself up to where you can maintain line of sight. Unless you were actually going out there and hiking, and the whole point of deploying is to minimize that need to go out and hike so we can save time.
Right. Okay. And let's moving on a little bit from sort of enforcement and emergency response. What about as far as assessing traffic accidents? Or, how are drones being used to better understand the causes of accidents and how to prevent them in the future?
So I can touch on that real quick. We're currently not doing any 3D mapping, although we're looking into it and we have demoed that. But even without the 3D mapping of an accident scene, the aerial images are definitely beneficial. Prior to using drones, we would have our CSI, our forensics folks, go out to the scene and they'd actually climb the hook and ladder fire truck all the way up the ladder with a camera and just get one angle shooting down. Whereas now, obviously, the drones have replaced that. There's no need for them to climb the ladder anymore, and we can get as many angles as we want and take hundreds of pictures if we wanted to. So just from the aerial images alone to give the overall visual of the intersection is huge.
Great. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
With that, exactly what he said. We're getting to the 3D mapping is obviously something that's coming, and one thing to consider with traffic accidents, one of the most high liability aspects of running a city is traffic. We average about 15 fatal traffic collisions a year in our city. We don't just do the aerial images. We try to fly the path of the vehicles involved in the collision. So if you have a car from the south and one from the east, we'll take and fly the drone back about a half mile at the elevation of where the driver would sit, and we'll fly the path of the cars, and we'll get a perspective of what the driver had. Are there obstructions in the roadway? Are there traffic hazards? Is it through a construction zone? Are the signals phasing properly? And it may not be critical to the investigation of who's at fault, but what it's going to do is you're going to document that scene. So in 5 years, when your city is sitting in civil court being sued because of roadway conditions, you can actually play the video and say, these are the exact conditions of the roadway at the time the accident occurred, and it's using the aircraft as a different tool other than just collecting that criminal evidence.
Right. David, you had something to add?
So the other way that we're doing it also, because we don't have the 3D mapping software as of yet, but we're still getting the ground control points and such. But we also fly the vehicles or the damaged property, and we'll get each corner of it, and our detectives are actually being able to use it for speed workup and crash analyzing and all that kind of stuff with the vehicles too. So.
One other interesting thing that we're doing with the drones related to traffic is for our DUI checkpoints. We have about 4 to 5 DUI checkpoints a year. And if you didn't know, the cone pattern, at least in California, the cone pattern in which you have to set up for a DUI checkpoint is actually, it matters, and it's based on case law. So what we've had previously is a person challenge that in court saying it wasn't a lawful DUI checkpoint. So we've actually used the drone to document that, and we'll start at the beginning and fly the entire route and record all that and how it's all set up from an aerial perspective.
That's interesting. I want to welcome Riley from the North Carolina Public Safety Drone Academy, and I think this is actually a good kind of segue into my next question, which is actually about developing training and education for officers or for people in public safety to be able to operate and fly drones. So Riley, maybe you want to talk a little bit about what you do at the Public Safety Drone Academy.
Sure, absolutely. First off, I'd like to apologize for being late. As you know, our state is being hit right now with a hurricane. We were on an emergency call with our governor now, and our team is leaving here in just a few minutes for a response. Our coastline is being hit by tornadoes and the hurricane at the same time. So we've already got teams in the air, and we're having to try to mitigate that from here. So I apologize for being late.
No worries. Yeah.
As far as education goes, from a state perspective, I started our academy, the North Carolina Public Safety Drone Academy, 3 years ago in the community college system. I embedded it in the community college system of North Carolina because it would provide instruction for our public safety and emergency services guys for free. They would get training credit, in-service credit, all for free. And so we host around 30 plus classes. We do large base scenario training for our drone guys. For law enforcement, we work with Highway Patrol, all the state agencies, all the major players. And we don't require anything other than we just show up and we teach the class with these guys. What we're working with North Carolina is to have a standardized form of practice and education for all emergency services across the board. As we all know, a 107 is a 107. We can all go online, pay the fee, and get the 107, but there's no practical application to ensure that our pilots know what they're doing as far as flying. So what we're doing is putting these pilots in those scenario-based situations from subject matter experts, not guys that say, I've got a 107 and I can teach you guys how to do this. If they're going to fly search and rescue situations, we want guys that's what they do. So we'll bring in industry leaders, we'll bring in major company partners, and we're trying to create that standard for the state in training. It will be, a slow process. It is a slow process, as you guys already know. But it's something that we feel is very, very much needed and necessary for emergency services.
Great, thank you. And I want to come back to some of the other panelists in terms of how your departments are training officers. But just Riley, real quickly, since you're in the middle of dealing with this emergency response right now, are you deploying drones, or what's happening as far as the response?
Yes, ma'am. Right now, we started deploying drones yesterday. To take before footage. So if anybody's on Facebook right now, you could go to the North Carolina Division of Aviation Facebook page. You can see some of our teams that are posting current pictures as of right now. We do, I think we've also got some footage on there of a couple of the tornadoes that came in that were caught by webcams coming in from the ocean. So we are deployed now. We are in meetings now, and our guys are going back, as I was saying. We're going to wait the storm out. Weather is deteriorating right now as we speak. So our guys are grounded right now, but then as soon as the storm moves out, last year we had 15 teams deploy across the state. We've got the same already. We're already set up and ready to go. They're already spun up and activated, and they're comprised of industry leaders, all your state agencies, the North Carolina Highway Patrol, Division of Aviation, and Department of Transportation, and of course our academy.
Right, okay. And a lot of that is maybe trying to identify where people may need help, right, once you're able to fly?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. So we'll be looking at flooding, roads, road conditions, bridges, dams, and then, of course, life.
Life, right. Okay, great. Well, good luck. I hope that it goes well. And for the rest of the panel, as far as, sort of developing training and curriculum, you all sort of mentioned that you have 11 or 12 people or dozens of people sort of certified on your teams. What has that process been like to get your officers certified to be able to fly?
So with us, we also teamed up with the College of Southern Nevada. We use their facilities, we use their aircraft and all for our training. I've, from the get-go, been getting with Ben Miller, Alameda County, a lot of the pioneers when it comes to the public safety drones. And they're the ones who actually helped me set up our program and how our training should be. It's a learning process. Our program, our training has come a long way from what it was 2 years ago. The problem that we're now having is recurrent training because our pilots have a primary job to do. Most of them are detectives in other units. So the drone is their secondary. So it's hard to take them away from their caseload and get them flight time. So that's the issue that we're having when it comes to recurrent training. But we do all our training in-house using CSN's property and all.
Great.
We do similar. We do kind of 3 sections. The first will be classroom portion, going over rules and regulations, getting them ready to take the test, talking about the aircraft, waivers, and so forth. Second will be actually going through the drones, how to operate them, all the different sensors and options. And lastly would be the actual operation. And we have an obstacle course that we do. We a lot of emphasis on indoor flying now, since that's a lot of what we're doing. So those are the 3 sections that we hit.
Great. Yeah.
I'm a little biased, but the regional training center is where I went through my training, and we try to send all of our people through it first because we want the consistency, knowing that every single person that comes out of that training is going to have the exact same training. And that's super critical if you're a manager of a program, is you have to look at your program, and training is the most important part of it. And you have to know everything, not only from pilot skills, but FAA regulation to airspace. You have to have your emergency drills down. You got to know maintenance. You got to know how much batteries you need for a certain mission. So we take all of that, and that's on a monthly training basis. We create courses for our guys to train. But really, the training that the whole reason I'm involved in the regional training center is because of the professional training that it is and the certification that it has. And you want your people to go through, whether it be an outfit like Riley's or wherever you get your training, it has to be consistent for everybody. It can't just be, and that's part of the problem with the COA is the training is left to you, and there's no way to know exactly what each individual pilot, what their skill level is.
Right, right. Yeah, did you want to
Yeah,
add
saying,
anything? Sorry.
with the fire department, following the same model of doing like some sort of like a 3-part, doing a classroom, doing a intro, and then actual flight mastery. But it does come down to, like these guys are saying, is the continuing education that goes with it. And as far as at least with the fire department goes, you guys may have heard earlier that NIST, National Institute of Standards Technology, has a drone practice course. NFPA has actually adopted that and put it into NFPA 2400, which was, I believe, published in December of 2018. So you can actually use that now as a standard of practice, and they've got a great course to set up. It really helps to ensure that all of the basic skills can be followed. All your pilots, as long as they can go through these courses, you know that they're going to have the same standard skill sets. You know where they're coming from as a baseline. And the bonus of it is that all this equipment is actually pretty inexpensive to create, set up, and go through.
Great. Okay, and so I just have a couple more questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So we've been talking a lot about how drones are used in public safety, in police departments and public safety agencies across the country. What do you think really needs to happen to have this scale, or to see sort of full-fledged use of drones in police departments sort of all across the country?
I think a big part of it is kind of dismissing a lot of the myths. You see a lot of agencies who are pitching their program to their department or city council, and you hear the public outcry of the police are maybe spying on me, Big Brother and all that, and kind of getting your message out there and showing what you're actually using it for. Involve the community, hold demos, put videos out there that you can release. Community involvement is huge. And dismissing those myths and explaining we're not out there spying on you. This is all mission-based. There's a reason why we're launching it, and this is why it makes it safer for us to operate out there.
So if you Google law enforcement drones, 90% of the news stories that are out there nationwide are all positive. The news media loves drones. They love us using it. They love public safety. They especially love the fire department using it, and let them pave the way for all of us. And I think if you have an event, if you have an established program and you know that it's solid, that your people are trained good, that your equipment's good, invite the media out and give them a demonstration. You'll make the news. There's no doubt about it. So we want that positive coverage. We want the social media coverage. Post stuff on your social media. That's what's going to get the word out. And just these success stories. These videos, like she showed earlier, those are the type of stories we need out there. Because that's what really resonates with the people, is these success stories of how we're using it for good.
Great.
Don't be afraid of the power of branding too. There's actually been great success when New York Fire put their drones out. They actually had them painted to look like fire engines on the side, and it's been huge. So we did the same thing. We kind of found a nice graphics kit. Ours looked like a fire engine in the sky, so it's a talking point. People see that, they're like, wow, that's the fire department drone? I want to know more. What do you guys use it for? There's just huge aspects like that you can really use to break through into that public perception.
Yeah, we do a lot of TV shows and such. We actually have an episode on Discovery Channel that they came out and filmed us doing a search and rescue. We've teamed up with our local channels, so that's actually helped us promote our unit, and we haven't had any pushback whatsoever when it comes to our use.
Can I add one
Sure,
thing? It
go
could
ahead.
work. I've seen public safety posts on social media where they are blatantly violating the flight over people rule or beyond visual line of sight. Just be careful. If you're going to post stuff on social media, make sure your videos are within the laws, because you are going to be scrutinized and closely watched more than anybody. And if you're posting a video, look at this cool shot of the beach or whatever it is, you just got to be careful.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Riley, do you want to add something?
And I'll add exactly everything that these guys are saying is completely true, and I agree 100% with it. One thing for positive marketing and acceptance is start with the kids. In North Carolina, we've embedded our state agencies and our academy into STEM projects. So when we go out and do a massive hands-on demo or training with fire, law enforcement, SWAT teams, what have you, we invite the local middle schools and high school STEM groups, because they all have them now, to come in and participate with us, to be able to see what we're doing and meet these guys, meet the pilots, and they love it. And as you guys know, when a happy kid goes home and he's super excited, or she's super excited, and she's talking to mom and dad, then mom and dad ultimately become super excited. So it's easier to win over that way, and we've had great success in North Carolina from doing those things. So it's just one positive that we've had.
Great. And so obviously there's so much potential and so many positive ways in which we're using these drones, but there's also like inherently safety risks, right? And we, by following 107, by following these regulations, we try to prevent anything bad from happening. But I've done a lot of reporting on drones, and I was looking quite a bit at how developing all this technology, so like remote ID and all these advancements to sort of make it easier to fly. But I'm wondering a little bit like what's at stake, sort of. So it's kind of like in my reporting, someone had said to me, if something bad happens and a drone is involved, that could like jeopardize everything and sort of like change the whole future. So I'm just wondering if anyone can comment a little bit about what's at stake and what safety mechanisms are in place that are specific to your operations or whatever to make sure these can be used well into the future.
So, public safety, law enforcement especially, is inherently dangerous. We're out there. We're involved in high risk operations all the time, and I think obviously we don't want anything to go bad. We don't want a drone falling on somebody's head, and thankfully, what everyone's been doing out there nationwide has been extremely professional, and I don't think we've had an incident yet that has caused that concern. But I think the important part is that if it does happen, make sure that you had that plan in place beforehand, that your operational plan was in place, that your people were trained properly, that your flight logs are up to date, that you're following FAA regulations, because all of it can be sorted out in the end. And like anything, we get involved in a shooting, and all of a sudden, automatically, it causes uproar to say that we did something wrong. But in the end, if your motor loses power and it falls down and falls on somebody, if everything that led up to that event was done right and your program is run correctly, then it should work out.
Great. Anyone else? No? Okay. And then my last question is that, there's lots of amazing opportunities to use drones across industries. That's kind of why we're all here at this conference. But as far as public safety, why is this a particularly important area that can make a difference? Matthew.
Just as Tim was explaining, some of the scenarios that we deal with are inherently dangerous, right? There's officers dealing with people who are armed, and using a piece of technology that can go in between the police officer and the suspect is huge. So this indoor flying, sending a drone into a building where someone might have a gun, I mean, it's so much safer. If the person shoots the drone or crashes the drone out of the sky, okay, just launch the next one, right? $200. It's much better than a police officer getting hurt or killed. At least you know he has a gun now. So just being able to use the technology in those type of high-risk scenarios is extremely helpful and much safer.
Yeah, I can second that, because we've actually had ours shot at, on a barricade. So we'd rather have that shot at than our officers. It saved us a lot when it comes to Overwatch. Officers can sit back and watch on a TV screen or on a monitor instead of being up there putting themselves in harm's way along with the public. We actually used it on a distraction where we came up and distracted the suspect while our officers were coming up behind them. That was tremendous when it came to officer safety and trying to help to save the public.
Great. Anyone else want to add anything before I open it up? Yeah.
So the beauty of after 25 years in this career, there's nothing. I've never felt more invigorated and interested in the subject than what I have been in the last few years dealing with the use of UAVs in public safety. And one thing that having the ability to manage a program and also teach at the Regional Training Center is our advanced classes. We do all that. We develop technologies and we come up with ideas of delivering medical supplies, delivering a tourniquet to an officer using the aircraft. Just land it next to the officer where he's pinned down behind a car or a citizen, drop medical bags, drop medication in floods, fly a two-way radio or a cell phone into a house and get an assessment of what it is. So the future of where we're going from this point is endless, really.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, with that, because we only have, I think, about 10, 15 minutes left, I'd just like to open it up to the audience for questions for the panelists. Anyone? Yeah.
When you are doing something that requires a waiver in an emergency situation where time is critical, how does that work?
So that's one of the things that's kind of ever changing. The process that's in place right now for that is there is a 24-hour emergency office of the FAA on the East Coast near DC, and the procedure is that public safety can contact that office by phone and explain the situation that we have going on and request emergency clearance. So they can get that to us either verbally right away during the phone call, or they might call back in a couple minutes after doing the coordination. So that is an area that we don't already have an approved waiver to be operating in. So that would be somewhere new that we don't have a previous authorization, if that makes sense.
I can tell you right now, you're gonna without a doubt, if you have an emergency ground, you're gonna get an emergency COA for airspace. You're gonna get an emergency COA for flight over people. I'm sorry, for night operations. You will not get one for flight over people. At this point, we've tried. They haven't issued it. The other thing is, if you're operating in an airspace, make friends with your ATCs. Get hold of your towers. Go visit them. They have the ultimate say as far as flying in their airspace. If you absolutely have an emergency and the FAA doesn't work out, call the tower, explain to the tower what you have going on. If you can get tower approval to fly in their airspace for your mission, then you're good.
For us, that's how we operate. We operate under Class B waiver. We don't have a COA. So as soon as an event goes on, we call straight to the tower supervisor. We ask for an altitude, and we'll tell them what time we're going to start, and then they just tell us, all right, call us when you're done. We do it up and down Flamingo, Tropicana, just outside McCarran all the time for our fatals, and that's usually at night too. So we just call ATC and tell them where we're at. We have a little grid. We give them the grid number, and we operate.
Yes, over here.
A few panel members mentioned streaming their videos. What kind of software are you using? Third party or in-house built?
So for us, we're using a streaming solution that uses LTE, so it uses internet signal. So it's a box that is usually on the ground next to the operator, and it plugs in HDMI to the controller. So the video is leaving the controller, going through the box, going up to the internet on a secure link, and now the command post, officers on their cell phones, it could literally be anywhere in the world because it's over the internet, and you could be watching it live. So that's the solution that we've been using.
So we use a lot of HDMI Direct Connect, and we deploy from fixed points. Top of our city hall is 6 stories high. That's parking structure in our downtown area. So we have those things hardwired straight to our command post at the EOC. And we've experimented with responding to radio calls. So we'll deploy on busy holidays from those locations, and we'll respond and handle radio calls. And HDMI cable, the technology now is you can run a 100-foot HDMI cable to an HDMI input, whether it be on the controller or on the monitor, and you'll have clear reception for that type of downlink. So if you have an tactical operation, and you don't want to be near your command post, you can run your HDMI cable to a splitter and have multiple screens, and you don't need a downlink. We use the same technology that Matt was just talking about. He's being humble, but the box that transmits through radio signal, And then there's other things where some aircraft, like the Autel, have a ground control station where they're actually their signal goes down from the aircraft to the remote, and then also to their receiver, where you can plug an HDMI cable into and have that anywhere near where the aircraft has range, and you can have that ability to have remote access that way.
And on the fire department, we've actually done that with some of the DJI models, especially the ones that do support like dual controller mode. We'll have our primary flight controller, and then the second controller is literally just somewhere near the command post, usually with an HDMI connection going into a larger screen. So as long as they're within radio signal of the drone itself, they're going to get the video feed, all the telemetry, and everything that we see as well.
Cool. Other questions? Yes, another one.
DJI stepped out of the room. Any concerns about, your data being sent to foreign countries? Is that something that you concern yourselves with? I know my city, they saw some news articles and my IT department went bonkers. So I'm just curious, since you guys are already established, was that a concern?
To be perfectly honest, I love DJI product. They're a pain in the ass when it comes to a lot of factors, but it's the best thing out there for public safety right now. And if they want to look at the Costco that I'm circling and checking the roof, or we're not doing anything that is critical to infrastructure. If we were going to do 3D mapping of a critical infrastructure, we would use a different aircraft. That we have multiple. We're not married to one aircraft. We don't teach DJI. We don't teach Autel. We don't teach Parrot. We don't teach the Unique. We give the ability to show what each aircraft has to offer, what their limitations are, and we let you decide what you want to use it for. So if you're concerned with critical infrastructure and having those images go back to China, then that's a valid concern. You should be concerned about it. If you're not concerned about it and you just want the best aircraft for the mission, you just have to make that decision. Because whether that's happening or not, I don't personally know, but I know that we're aware of it, and we pick our missions and our aircraft based on what we need to accomplish.
Any other?
That's one of the reasons why we fly what we do. We don't have any DJI products whatsoever. So.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Yes, over here.
See that technology advancing, like future vision, what would you like to use? If you had a brainstorm and say, hey, I'm going to build this future drone program and apply it to whatever job, fire, search and rescue, or police, what would you like to see in the future?
I'd personally like to see two things. Number one, immediately, is what I call the ultimate indoor drone. We're taking DJI drones that we use that work well for us. It's the best thing that we've used. But that particular drone is not really meant to go indoors. We're making it work for us. So I'd like to see a drone that the technology is such that it can see where the walls are. It'll stay centered in the house. The reception's never a problem. There's enough light, that kind of thing for indoor use. Also, what I see in the future is, down the line, is drones, instead of being connected by radio frequency from the controller to the drone, is using LTE, is using LTE network, right? Cellular. Well, I think we're a ways away from that. Now they're testing it out of the country, but obviously there's FAA regulations that are holding us back from that. But I think at one point, a dispatcher is going to push a button and a drone's going to take off and go to that call and give instant view down on that call.
So I want to introduce our panel here. On the far left, we have Cody Bankelman. He's the technical product manager for the Esri imagery team, and he's been of great help to me in advising me on Drone Map, one of our data processing software options. Next to him, we have Ava.
Avi. It's Avi. Yeah.
Say your name.
Avi Lazovic.
Okay, and he is a vice president for a company called Parazone Drone Safety Systems, and it's great to have him because his company advises clients on waivers and approvals, and that's something that's an interest to me since my agency is trying to get a beyond line site approval, and so there's a real niche for those companies. Then next to him, the young lady is Fane Greenwood. She's a pilot with Massachusetts Department of Transportation, and has a background in, well, I won't say that. Sorry about that. Then we have Mr. Singh on the end here. He's a sales engineer for Pix4D, which everyone knows is another drone processing program. So we'll go ahead, and the first question I want to ask our panel, we don't have a PowerPoint for this, but we'll just get on some topics here, and feel free if you want to make a point. I guess you can throw your hand up, and I'll call on you. But as we go through each topic, make sure you ask any questions. So instead of we can hold them to the end, and if you want to ask some additional questions. But as we go through each topic, just raise your hand. My question to the panel is, if you're going to pick a drone processing software, which is a critical element if you're going to do mapping. It's not like video. You have to have a program that's going to take the JPEGs that you flew and turn them into one of several products, including what a lot of us want, and that's contours. What would be the elements you would look for and not look for in the available software packages? And we've kind of an understanding that folks might actually name the program. There's not that many of them, and so just like to ask the panel, what are you looking for and not looking for in a processing program?
Go ahead.
Hey, I'm Ungud from Pix4D. It's really nice to see some friendly faces and a lot of new ones.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. So from my perspective, it has to work. That's the most important thing. The user interface is important. The cost point's important. How easy it is to learn, that's important. The resources on a website like Pix4D, we have a tremendous number of resources to learn how to use it. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is that your processing algorithms actually have to work. For a lot of us, like myself, that are super nerdy, I know how everything works, or I think I do, and I love telling people about it. For a lot of people out there, for the end user, from the business perspective, it's does your algorithm, is it robust enough to produce the high quality data that you need to answer the questions that you need? So that's what I think, is it should work.
Yeah, and also ease of use is huge. I mean, the humanitarian sector, and you got a lot of people who could not care less about drones, the technology. They're not interested in it as a hobby. They just want to make sure it works, it's easy, and it's easy to use. It's not going to cause them any trouble. It's going to get what needs to happen done. And actually, here's another element that I think needs to be addressed more is localization and language. So are there ways you can localize the software in other languages? Are there ways we can make it easy to use? Maybe you don't read another language, like lots of symbols, or that's an important consideration if you're going to be using this tech outside the United States or English-speaking countries. And that's a big, also price, honestly, is huge because humanitarian and disaster response sectors especially are infamously poorly funded. People just can't afford really expensive licenses, so if there's ways to have lower cost products or price breaks for certain types of organizations, NGOs, it's going to matter a lot because people just cannot afford anything that's particularly expensive in a lot of cases.
I'm from ParaZero. We focus on safety systems for flight over people, so I don't have a great answer specifically about this question. I will say, just because we're focused on the safety aspects, which then help get waivers and approvals, I think being familiar with that software, whichever one it is you choose before you go out to the field, is critically important, so you don't have to go study it while you're out there, and it allows you to focus on the operation, on the safety of the operation, instead of on learning the software. So that ties into the ease of use, but also the being familiar with the software before you go out there.
Well, I'll try not to make this too long. A lot of thoughts come to mind when Ken says, what would you look for in the software? I guess I would agree ease of use is certainly important, and you want it to get to the end product. But I would be the first to admit that there's no software out there that's always going to work. And one of the things I will also admit I'm a bit frustrated in our own software is when things don't work properly and I get an error message that says 999 something failed. that's not particularly helpful. So you really want good feedback. It's never going to work perfectly every time, and ideally you'd really like to get good feedback on what failed, where to go next, that sort of thing. Another aspect that I think is very challenging is even if we're focusing this topic on mapping specifically, it's very hard to please every user community. It seems like everybody has their own requirements. I'm thinking of things like using the cloud or not using the cloud. There are some who think you've got to do everything in the cloud. There are some who would rather be disconnected and not rely on the cloud. But if you've got a strong feeling for how your organization works, obviously you want to look for software that will support that mode, whether it's local only, cloud only, or some sort of a hybrid. But it really is hard to please everyone. And so flexibility in the software is important, but I think a real key is something that will give you feedback on what went wrong, and at the same time, when things do work properly, you'd like to get good feedback on exactly what sort of accuracy you got. That's something that I've seen a bit of an evolution in this particular industry over the last 5 years, is Pix4D has done some fantastic work and made it very easy to get good quality products. But again, you want to know what the accuracy is. And what I was starting to say is an evolution over the last 5 years is a growing awareness in the end user and your clients of the importance of accuracy and the ability to actually measure the accuracy of your output. I know we're not up here to pitch our own products, but I do want to admit that in an earlier version of our software, we did not give you good quality accuracy reports. I can go ahead and admit that now because we've fixed that in the software, and we now are giving you good accuracy reports. But this is just kind of a soapbox issue for me, is to make sure everybody is aware of how you measure accuracy and determine if your particular project requires high accuracy. There are many applications that you simply don't need centimeter or sub-meter accuracy, but if you do need it, just make sure you know how to measure it, make sure your software and the rest of your inputs will support the accuracy that you need.
Okay, does anyone in the audience have any comments or questions to that question? We'll go ahead. Okay, my next question I've been dying to ask, this is about cutting edge technology without saying there's a particular model, but of the 3 types of UAVs, which fixed wing, VTOL, and copter, which one of those do you feel is the best for mapping applications, and within that, which maybe mention a cutting edge thing that someone's doing that is new and cutting edge?
Sure, thanks. So my Twitter handle is Fixed Wing Sing. So does that answer the question? I'm a big proponent of fixed wings. About 5-6 years ago, I was flying SenseFly EBs in India. I just went over to India because I'm Indian and I wanted to see what it's like to work in that environment. And here in the United States, we didn't have the regulation that we were allowed to do with the flexibility that we could do over there. So I got to fly SenseFly EBs in really, really hot, very humid climates, mapping places that had never been mapped before for really powerful applications, from humanitarian to for engineering and for businesses that needed to make money. And I found that the fixed wing unit specific to mapping is really ideal. But then let's look at another application that's incredibly important to the drone industry right now, and that's collision reconstruction for police officers. There's an accident on a highway, they take a drone out, they fly it over, they put the imagery through Pix4D or whatever software they want, and they're able to get these really high precision maps that they can use in court to justify what happened in that accident or investigate it. In that use case, if you're a police officer in the middle of an urban environment, or there's a lot of power lines in the way, you're gonna need a fixed wing unit, So from a perspective of which drone is the best, I mean, I personally am a big proponent of fixed wings, especially for mapping. I really like the SenseFly EB. There's a Quantum Systems, they make really good stuff. For VTOLs, Wingtra makes really good stuff. There's a lot of really great products that are available today. I just think that sometimes they're not always utilized the way they should be, because everyone's really fascinated with quadcopters. So I don't know if there's always one tool for the job, but there are options.
Yeah, it's highly contextual in our experience. It's going to be everything. I mean, from what I've observed, both in my own work and also just from seeing what's going on in the humanitarian international sector, it's all over the map. I mean, honestly, you see a lot more multi-rotor just because they're cheaper. And well, you can build your own fixed wing, to be fair, pretty inexpensively. That's a skill set that most people don't have or not invested in accumulating, whereas you can run out and buy a Phantom for $1,000. And that's a much lower barrier to entry for a lot of people. So, I mean, I completely agree with you that fixed wings are often a better mapping solution. They can map much larger areas. They're just much better for that, whereas with the Phantom, you're gonna have to swap out batteries, a gazillion times to map an area equivalent to what you'd be mapping with a fixed wing. But the accessibility of the technology is lower in that sense. I think they're also, people perceive there's a bigger learning barrier to them, I think also, because with the Phantom, again, people think I can get it out of the box, start flying it, get it done. I think people feel there's more skill involved. Flying a fixed wing may not necessarily be true, but I think people see it that way sometimes. So that's something that we see a lot of. And also in the context of humanitarian environments, complex environments, because you have to have a landing area for a fixed wing of some sort, whereas with a multi-rotor, you can, of course, touch that down in a very tight, constrained environment. Sometimes that's the only thing you're going to be able to fly. But yeah, I do think we could be using fixed wings more. There are some price and skill barriers to that still haven't really been resolved yet.
Yeah, so I think one important thing to consider in a mapping or survey type of mission is if you need any waivers or approvals from the FAA in order to do that. So some cases you don't, and then you have the freedom to make a decision based on some of the factors that were mentioned here. Other times you need to kind of choose the right platform that you'll be able to get that type of approval with. So it could be beyond visual line of sight, or it could be operations over people. So each one you have a more limited choice of platforms for that. So OPSO for people, I mean, there have been a couple that have been granted with the SenseFly EB or with the Parazero, with the Phantom or Mavic with the Parazero SafeAir system. So those are kind of the options you have there, and then it kind of extends to beyond visual line of sight as well. Unless you're in really rural areas, if you want to operate BVLOS, you're probably operating over people as well, or you need to verify somehow that there are no people there. So you might need an aircraft which is appropriate for both types of operations. So it's something to consider as well.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure I've got a lot to contribute. Again, I work at a software company, so we've got a few drones we operate for testing, but I don't have a great depth of my own personal experience, although I've seen a lot of data. I guess I would push back to the question that it really depends on what kind of mapping you're doing. At Esri, we've got 45 years of history and bias that assumes everything is 2D, and we're slowly getting over that and working more in 3D. But unless we're excluding 3D building mapping, I would say, a quadcopter is certainly going to be more effective for doing multiple orbits. I think if you're covering a large area, it's obvious the fixed wing can cover more area in a given battery load. And the only caution, I guess, with the fixed wing is just make sure you're not getting too much ground blur. With the rotary, of course, you can travel more slowly over the ground and you're not going to get the blurred pixels. So again, it depends.
All right, does our audience have any additional points or questions on favorite UAV types? My agency or each one of us?
Whatever tool you have in your toolbox.
Go ahead.
That's the best one.
So I also work for a software company. I sold all my drones because I have access to them at the office. But none of us said sensors on the drone, by the way. I was just thinking about that. To answer that question, I think, cool, the type of drone you use is really important, but the sensor that's on that drone is way more important than the actual drone you're using, because it's that sensor that gets you data. Drones they're flying cameras, and especially to us here in the mapping world. What do I own? I have a Paradenofi, I have a Phantom 4 Pro. I wish I could afford a SenseFly EB. That would be awesome for personal use, but if I had to enter the real world today, by real world I mean, like, let's say I got fired from Pix4D. I have this cool skill set. I would go out there, do mapping missions, help people out, etc. I'd buy a SenseFly EB and a Phantom 4 Pro.
No, go ahead, everyone. If you...
Well, that's why I agree with that. Yeah, that's pretty much what we're doing at Mass DOT too, is Phantom 4s, and we've got some Mavics as well, and Sensefly EB. We also have a Dell Air we're kind of experimenting with as well, but I mean, I've seen incredible success with that combination of Phantoms and EBs. And in terms of the humanitarian sector, as a data point, I haven't like done this formally, but the vast majority of what's out there, it's 99% Phantoms and EBs. That's what everybody uses in the humanitarian space, so.
We have plenty of Phantom 4s and Mavic 2s, but since we're component manufacturers, we manufacture the parachute system. You really don't want to be doing with those drones what we're doing with them. So yeah, I would leave it up to you to make that decision.
At Esri, we've got a handful. I guess we've got an old Solo from 3DR. We've got a Phantom 4. We've got a one of the Matrice 200s. And I think a unique USA H520G. They're working to get government approval on that particular model, so we're working with them on that. But anyway, I didn't specify any of those. Those are just what we've got.
Go ahead, in the back.
So this is kind of a two-part question. First part is, if you're involved in a mapping modeling operation, like for instance, you're not typically covering the larger areas that a fixed wing is better suited for. Is there a price point? Because again, as one of the panelists pointed out, it's typically more important about the sensor and the accuracy of what that sensor is capturing and where it's being geotagged. You know, is there a price point for something less than, say, the Sensefly EV? And then the second part of that question is, I had somebody pose to me a question that I honestly did not know, which is, why don't you just buy an RC plane and then mount your sensor to that? It's literally thousands of dollars cheaper.
Did everyone hear the question?
Yeah.
So let's address the second point first. Why do we not use RC planes? Because there's no autopilot, they're not stable, and I suck at flying. The other thing is, an RC plane, you have to fly that thing. When it comes to mapping, you guys shouldn't be flying. It's all autonomous missions. There's plenty of free capture apps. Pix40 has one. A lot of our competitors have them. Sensefly EB comes with its own app that's inbuilt, eMotion. That's really amazing. So the thing is that these should be autonomous missions. We should be able to make the technology so easy to use that it should not be something you have to think about or something that you have to manually do. Today, the only stuff that you really need to manually fly if you're making 3D models or maps for any sort of analytics is going to be anything that's tall and skinny, like a cell phone tower, anything that's lattice structure, like a bridge, etc. That stuff's pretty hard, so you have to fly that manually, and there are people out there that are very experienced at doing that and can teach you how to do that. Or I can show you photogrammetrically why there's certain methods that we address. Does that answer that question?
Cool. Yes, to elaborate on that, there are people who make DIY UAVs using RC airplanes as the body and then equipping that with autopilots. That still happens today, but honestly, the problem with that is that you still have to land it manually, which is difficult, and that requires a skill set a lot of people don't have. So yeah, there's a reason people are paying a lot of money for these more autonomous fixed-wing systems. RC DIY exists, but it's difficult.
And then his other question was the cost. I think a good example of one that's under the cost of an EB, because the EB's toward the higher price range.
Oh, well, you can buy an EB Classic on eBay.
Mm-hmm. In terms of fixed-wing units, I mean, I've seen $500 for a DIY unit, but that's DIY, and you're going to have to learn how to land that thing yourself, which is a little nerve-wracking. But yeah, again, the multi-rotors do tend to be a lot cheaper these days, which is a huge advantage in terms of just lower-income organizations or groups.
Go ahead.
Curious if anyone on the panel has an opinion regarding the Phantom 4 RTK?
Yeah, for sure. Do you guys want to answer any questions?
No, go ahead.
Okay, cool. So this is actually a really hot topic right now, Phantom 4 Pro RTK. So when we talk about DJI drones, especially for mapping, I think of the Phantom 4 Pro as that standard. The reason is, once again, not because of the drone, but because of the sensor. The Phantom 4 Pro camera has a very high optical clarity, which means that it's a really nice lens. It's a metric sensor, which means that you can't optically zoom. There's no parts that are going in and out. It digitally zooms, but not even that much. Basically what that means is it's a very good scientific camera that enables you to get high quality data that you can push through. Software algorithms that go through all of the images, they're very clearly able to pick out points that they can use to convert into our point clouds that are really important and that we need out there. So from that perspective, that Phantom 4 Pro sensor is amazing. And I, for one, can say, I work for Pix4D. It's hardware agnostic. A lot of the stuff that I say here is based on my experience. And if, for those of you who know me, you know that I always just say what I think. The Phantom 4 Pro RTK has that camera on it. So that's really important. But what's also important is it's the only multi-rotor unit today that is commercially available at a decent price point where the RTK drone, so the RTK just means better GPS. So the RTK GPS on the Phantom 4 Pro actually geotags the images with the RTK GPS. So for example, if you buy a DJI M210 RTK, you're just paying that extra money for the RTK unit so that it flies prettier in the sky, which is important for, if you want to have it fly really stable in the sky. But when you care about mapping, you care about those images. And so the Phantom 4 Pro RTK actually does geotag the images correctly. And if you look at their marketing video, it's the Pix4D software that's in that video. So I think it's a cool product, and I wish that there were more available like that, because I think that having drones like that are at a low price point, it just enables the proliferation of technology.
All right, I want to, mapping, cameras and mapping are huge. Okay, so what I want to ask everyone, and Mr. Singh raised a good point about geotagging, and that we can definitely say, I think more can be said about that. So would the panelists tell us their comments and tips and tricks about cameras and things that are going to happen in the course of flight missions, and then processing problems that might happen due to certain kinds of cameras?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question.
Okay, so anything you want to comment about, he raised the issue of geotagging, and I'd like to add that geotagging in the field after each mission is a pain in the neck. So some cameras geotag, some don't. So if you can say any comment you want about the cameras and mapping, what you think is the most effective one for different applications like 3D. Anything you want to say about cameras and how the problems you might have either when you go to process the data for cameras. Anything you want to say about cameras?
I mean, at least for super new modern UAS models, the DJI products we fly, we don't really have a lot of problems with that in terms of geotag. It works pretty darn well. There used to be issues with that in the past when we had to, we had to attach your own like Nikon or Canon SDK. You had to attach your own point and shoot camera to your, homemade drone and make sure that had a GPS tag. But it's not really, that's kind of becoming less of a problem these days. I mean, there's other issues in terms of what can you make a 3D model of. Running water is really difficult, but in terms of geotag, it's working pretty good these days, as far as I can tell, the new stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. So I think that this is actually a great question because it talks to the one, okay, so it's great when we all say, hey, yeah, the industry's moving forward, we're doing awesome stuff, this stuff works better today, but obviously that needs to continue to be refined, and now that there's really good choices on the market for professionals to make, what I would say is look at the optical clarity of that lens. Basically, is the camera designed for photogrammetry? Is it designed to do the mapping work that you need it to? Because you will see a difference when we're talking, the surveyors will really see the difference. When we're talking centimeters or millimeters of accuracy, especially in the vertical, that's where the camera you use will come into play. That's why the Phantom 4 Pro is great. That's why the camera systems that SenseFly makes for their drones that are custom built are great. That's why the Wingtra 42 megapixel Sony camera is great, right? Now, Cody brought up a really, really important point 2 comments ago. He said, when you're using a fixed wing, be careful about motion blur. When we're talking about cameras, we're talking about your skill level and your education on how do you use that camera. Are you making sure that the white balance is set correctly? If it's a sunny day, you need to ensure that your white balance is set correctly because especially DJI drones, they tend to overexpose the colors. So if you're working out in a pretty homogeneous area like a desert or you're flying something metallic like Michael here flies airplanes, he maps crashed airplanes, those are heavy items. You need to make sure that your camera systems are set up, your white balance, your ISO, et cetera. For the most parts, the apps will do it automatically. But the point is to just know what you're buying and reach out to people out there that know what they're talking about.
And some basic photography training or education's never a bad idea. So learning a bit about just how, standard non-drone cameras work, ISO, aperture, all that stuff will be very helpful.
A couple other quick comments. Something that Pix4D implemented a few years back was the rolling shutter correction. So that's another consideration if you're not familiar with the different ways a camera can expose. So you've got a 2D array sensor, but in some cameras it doesn't. The shutter doesn't expose the entire sensor at the same moment. So that's certainly a consideration. And I admit I'm not an expert on what modern cameras are doing, how many use a rolling shutter and how many don't. But that would be one consideration. I guess maybe I'm coming at this from a different perspective, but when Ken mentions cameras, I think about thermal infrared, I think about ultraviolet, I think about Corona cameras. I'm seeing a lot of growth in close range inspection with quadcopter drones where we're not doing 2D mapping of the terrain, but we're looking at other applications. And again, if the topic here is limited to mapping, then maybe that's not applicable. But there are quite a number of cameras out there. I don't know if I should say names, but they're not our products, but there are at least 3 or maybe 4 companies that make multi-sensor cameras for doing agriculture. They're generally multispectral camera systems. So if you're looking at either agriculture or any sort of environmental monitoring, you may want to look at one of the multispectral sensors. And I agree, if you're doing just classic mapping, you want to have a good quality photogrammetric lens if possible, whereas in the multispectral world, again, I don't know the specific details. I don't know if those typically have metrics lenses. I don't think they do, but you're looking more at the spectral quality, and there's quite a range of differences between some of those cameras in how they process the individual sensor images. One specific is whether or not the individual images are spectrally co-registered from the sensor or if that's something that your software has to do after the fact. And I've definitely seen some significant problems with systems that don't do that spectral co-registration for you. And one that I guess maybe I should not mention their name specifically, but there is at least one camera system, I don't know about the others, that will convert the brightness values into percent reflectance, which is what you want if you're trying to do quantitative studies of vegetation. And again, if this is all about horizontal mapping, maybe this is off topic, but the bottom line is there are a lot of different cameras out there, especially in the thermal infrared. If you're looking at wildlife surveys, if you're looking at search and rescue, there's amazing price reduction in the last decade in terms of thermal infrared cameras. So it's not so much mapping, it's more real-time viewing, but there are a lot of different sensors, a lot of different cameras. And we really, when we were talking about mapping accuracy earlier, I hadn't thought to mention LiDAR, but obviously with a LiDAR system, you're going to get much greater accuracy and you're going to spend more money. So
Yeah, you're going to spend a lot more money. Pix4D, I like to say we're the cheap man's LiDAR. So actually, from a drone, the photogrammetry accuracy and the LiDAR accuracy is pretty much on par. Terrestrial, LiDAR wins every time. I mean, that's always going to be the case, but you're also going to have to spend a ton of money, and you're going to have to wait out there for a while. So photogrammetry, there's differences. And I think that Cody's comments on multispectral and thermal, that's my favorite topic. So all those cameras they do have metric global shutters. So like the Mica Sense, the Parrot, et cetera, they're all properly built sensors. So this is a field where, well, actually, question for the audience, just to show of hands, who knows what a multispectral camera is? Oh, super cool. Who knows what a thermal camera is? That one's a little more obvious. Yeah. Do you know thermal cameras aren't cameras? They're called microbolometers. Yeah.
Good word.
Yeah, thanks.
It's a good word. Yeah, no, the thermal sensors are super cool in the disaster response humanitarian sector. There's a lot of satellite imagery analysis that goes on using multispectral and hyperspectral sensors for doing things like predicting crop failures, doing things like searching for signs of burning during warfare or civil unrest. So it's going to be great to have some chances to use drone technology to do more kind of spot or higher resolution work in those areas. A bit of that is already happening in the context of also development agriculture, so helping developing countries develop better farming programs. There's a ton of interesting work being done with these multispectral sensors and UAS in developing countries and in humanitarian contexts. It's really cool stuff.
All right, what questions do we have on that topic? Go ahead.
Yeah, I work on with the construction companies. I do mass models, and something that I'm struggling with that I haven't been able to find a software that does a good job at is to create 3D models. I think there is a good understanding of what kind of altitude it's best to create a 2D plane. You know, the higher that you fly, the more area that you cover, so your map is going to look really good. But that's not the same way when you try to create a 3D model of a construction that is being constructed, and you need to get a lot of detail. You cannot get very close, so you get very far. If you process your 3D map, it all looks very blurry.
So I think we can fix what you're doing out there so that it's not blurry. That's the first thing. Secondly, when we talk about 3D models, so you have point clouds, where everything's a discrete point, and then you have meshes, where they take the point cloud, where everything is one discrete point, meaning each point has an XYZ location, and it's separated from the point adjacent to it. And then you have meshes, where they basically draw triangles between all of your points. So that's the main difference here. When we're talking about meshes, Pix4D, we get this complaint all the time, and I will admit that our mesh is not the best on the market. I think that our point cloud is fantastic, I think it's exceptional, but I agree that the mesh is not the best on the market. But then again, what do you care about? Do you really care about how pretty it looks, or do you care about how accurate it is from a survey or millimeter standpoint?
So from a perspective of my line of business is to how pretty it looks. Can I show it to somebody that is trying to present a model that can be 360?
Who's seen Game of Thrones? You know the wall? Mm-hmm. Did you know that the wall is flown with drones, created into a point cloud, and then it's a mesh? That's the CGI in the show. So you know how pretty that looks, right? The reason that it looks that pretty, and what people on the market that are making super pretty 3D meshes are doing, is they're generating the point cloud in a software like Pix4D or Drone2Map or you know, Agisoft, et cetera. There's plenty of them out there. Obviously, I'm biased, but you know, there are other ones out there. They make that point cloud, they export that point cloud from the photogrammetry software, and they put it into a 3D specific software like Blender or Rhino or ZBrush, and in there, they're making them look really pretty. So for example, the new Call of Duty that's coming out, the whole thing has been derived with photogrammetry point clouds, and then guys spend hours manually making them look really pretty in 3D specific softwares. So when you look at something and it's so pretty and it's so visually appealing, there was a lot of artistic effort and a lot of digital work that went into enabling that. So with companies like Pix4D, what we're trying to do is not provide you with a lot of manual work, but provide you with a software package or an algorithm that can do that automatically so that you don't have to do that work yourself. So if you want it to be super, super pretty, you're gonna have to put some work in.
All right, can we take one more question on that topic if anybody has it? All right, I want to get into a topic that's really near and dear to my heart and troubles, and that's data processing, mapping with drones. That's a huge part of the workflow, and so I'd like some comments, if you can make some comments on avoiding potential problems, GCP ground control points, specifically what can we do to make accurate contours out of these, whatever the platform is, whatever the software is. So please comment anything on data processing.
Well, here's something to think about from, again, disaster response humanitarian side of things. There's often a problem where you don't have access to the internet, so you don't have access to cloud processing tools. So you really have to account for that when you're doing disaster response mapping, orthophotography, or 3D model creation. Because if you don't have access to the cloud, you need to have access to a powerful enough computer to do that processing on board, or you need to have a lot of time, or usually both, because it's going to take a lot longer than it would be if you use cloud processing. So that's something we're always thinking about in the context of using this stuff in rough environments, places where there's no electricity or power. There's a whole new level of consideration of what's possible, how long it's going to take you. That's all really important stuff, and that's something to keep in mind if you're working in the field or outside of an urban environment.
Well, I guess I should volunteer and talk about this for a little bit. I've actually worked with Ken for quite a few hours, working on trying to give him the contours he wants. And I don't know how to address this without going on too long. Within our software, if you build the point cloud and then ask the software to give you a digital terrain model, the DTM, our software will do its best possible job to remove all the surface features, the buildings, the trees, et cetera. And I just want to caution, I won't comment on anybody else's software, but in ours, I would caution, I wish our software had a bright flashing label that said what we're going to give you in terms of a digital terrain model is a first order estimate. And the bottom line is, without some manual intervention, you can't expect any software, as far as I know, to really give you a good quality DTM in a fully automated process. And you need to have a good quality DTM before you're going to get good quality contours out. And then beyond that, again, this would be something where I'll add the disclaimer that I'm talking now specifically about our software, and if you want to come by the booth, I'll show you some of this. But even if you have a good quality DTM, and what I mean is accurate, that actually shows all the ground features, if you simply run an automated contour on that, you're not going to get cartographically pleasing contours. You're going to see a lot of noise. If the contour happens to hit a rock, it'll go around the rock, and you'll see a lot of it'll be an accurate contour, but that's not generally what people want. So there's an additional bit of processing beyond having a good quality DTM to give you a cartographically pleasing contour. So not to tell Ken that his expectation is unrealistic, but it is really challenging, first of all, to do that automated filtering, and then second, to give you good quality contours from your DTM. So if you're using our software, the drone processing software, I would caution you, it's a first order estimate. And if you really need good quality contours, this kind of goes back to the 3D model, you will have to spend some time editing and have the appropriate tools to do that. I've done a lot of work with LiDAR, so outside the drone industry, but the world leader in terms of LiDAR processing still has a lot of manual intervention in terms of giving you a good bare earth model from their LiDAR. Or from any even the best quality LiDAR. So it's a very challenging problem. Now, with machine learning, who knows? That I would expect that will get better in the next 5 to 10 years, but that's future.
So who in here is a PLS? Did it take you 6+ years to get there? Yeah. Being a land surveyor is not a joke. They have a comprehensive understanding of how the Earth is modeled. Geospatial science, yes, with drone technology, with mapping that comes with drones, with softwares like Drone and Map and Pix4D, et cetera, we've really lowered the barrier to entry to making this type of data. But when you're looking at how accurate your data needs to be, you need to have a comprehensive understanding of what accuracy really means and what it means in the context of the project that you're actually looking at. And so with that, sure, we can talk about best practices. I mean, if you go to Pix4D website, if you just Google ground control points Pix4D, it'll come up with a multi-page blog with articles and YouTube videos on where to place them, et cetera. We have to think of what is a ground control point. A ground control point is a very high precision GPS measurement that somebody is going and collecting in the field. So did they collect that point appropriately? Did they space those points appropriately in the field? Typically, if you're not using an RTK drone, if you're using a drone with a regular GPS and you need a super high precision map coming out of it, you need to ensure that your GCPs are no more than 500 feet away from each other and that they're evenly spaced through the scene. That if there's areas of higher undulation, so like high elevation, low elevation, that you have GCPs at those points. If you have a section of your area that's very it has a bunch of cliffs and it has some mounds, et cetera, you need more GCPs there. You need to make sure that, like a table needs 4 legs to balance, you need to have enough GCPs so that your point cloud can be balanced, literally in space. And so the equipment that you use to get that and the drones that you use to get that and the processing, it all gets into it. The other thing that I think a lot of people, one issue that I've had, and this is because I used to be a trainer and I used to teach the software, is I think everybody should be investing more in their own education and investing in their own software skills than buying cool drones and fancy cameras. So if you spend a long time learning how to edit that point cloud, what processing options are good for particular environmental settings, et cetera, you're going to get better data and you're going to be able to ensure that those contours have been made more appropriately. And does that answer the question?
Yeah,
Cool.
that was my question.
Actually, if I could add a bit more, Ken, I'd forgotten that you'd asked about control points, and I'll keep this very brief, but I'd mentioned earlier generating an accuracy report out of your processing. I'll keep this brief. If you're not familiar with the difference between a control point and a checkpoint, that's something you may want to read up on, and this is what we've added in our software, is the ability to declare some of those surveyed points as independent checkpoints. They're withheld from the processing, and those are the points you use to measure the final accuracy of your output. So I'll end there. I assume 90% of you know what I'm saying, but if that is something new, then that's something you should read up on.
I'll just add one quick point from a slightly different perspective, but we have all these regulations and limitations that kind of define how we can fly and how we can operate the drones in different mapping areas or construction sites or wherever it may be. Some of that can have an effect on where you could place GCPs or where you could fly. And if you have to work around those limitations, it'll either take you longer or it will reduce the quality, perhaps, of the operation. So getting that ability, which up until a few months ago, it wasn't really possible to get a waiver for flight over people with off-the-shelf systems. That's kind of changed recently, so it's something to consider when you're looking at different operations and different projects, that now it might be much easier, much more efficient, and you'll get a better quality result if you move forward and get a waiver for ops over people or some other type of waiver that'll help you in that job site.
It's also important to be able to read the landscape, so basically the art of the pre-flight visit, so scoping at the landscape, what's going to work, what's not going to work, looking for things that will interfere with your map. I mean, things like radio interference, that's come up for me before and I had to make a map. Is there a body of water that's going to mess things up? So I think over time, as you do more UAS mapping, you do develop this sense of what's going to work, what's not, what's going to be problematic, but you just kind of have to, one, fly, and two, do pretty systematic pre-site visits, but don't just assume it's going to go easily or well. You really have to scope this stuff out and also develop a kind of a sense for it as time goes by.
Okay, does the audience have any questions on that topic? Okay, quick waiver follow-up question. There's technology out. We want to get an update. Maybe, some of us want to get an update on what's for to make the FAA happy on the beyond line of sight. Maybe Avi can. What is out there? How do you advise people? How could you advise people to meet that sense and avoid requirement when they?
Sure.
What's the technology or the workflow?
Yeah, so there's basically two main types of risk in a drone operation. There's the risk of collision with a different aircraft, and then there's the third-party ground risk. What happens if the drone crashes and hits a person? We're actually more focused on the latter because we develop parachute systems which reduce the kinetic energy of a falling drone. But until recently, I mean, there were a couple solutions available. So the SenseFly EB was one that a couple companies got waivers, both for ops over people and for BVLOS with that platform. There's the Vantage Snap, which is used probably not for mapping, but used by news and media companies. And most recently in June, or since June until now, we got 17 waivers approved with the Parazero parachute system on a Phantom 4 or a Mavic 2. So that kind of changes the game in terms of survey and mapping, at least with in-line of sight. When you go beyond line of sight, there's some technologies out there that are both sense and avoid. It's a combination of sense and avoid and a UTM platform and communication with other aircraft. it's a big challenge which hasn't quite been solved yet. Sense and Avoid is being tested in certain IPP, Integration Pilot Program, projects. Just recently, a couple of waivers were approved for beyond visual line of sight. I believe one of them is with an EB, but that process is not easy. It's not really commercially available at scale for those types of operations. It's still kind of in the testing phase until the FAA gets comfortable with it and until some of the technology matures a little bit more, it seems.
Yeah, I have one comment on this. It's really important, right, to do all this research about drones and beyond visual line of sight, et cetera. Sometimes people try to do massive projects with a drone where they should have just used an airplane. It would have been like a quarter the cost, a quarter the time. There is a point where the drone, I use drones all the time. Sure, I have a friend that did 100 square miles with a drone. In that particular, the biggest known drone project to man, if you Google Pushing the Limits Pix4D, I did a webinar with him. He is one of the biggest super users out there. They use drones because they have to, because there is a reason with certain sensor systems that they use and the resolution that they need that they have to use a drone for that. And that's why it took so many months of flying and months of processing. There are other applications out there where sometimes a client will put out a bid and then all these drone companies will go and say, yeah, we'll use drones. Whereas the reality is, at that scale, an airplane would have probably been better.
Also, satellite imagery. So there's high-resolution satellite imagery available. You can buy it. You can go on Digital Globe and buy it. It's going to be expensive, but in certain circumstances, it might make more sense than a drone. Because I've seen this a lot, the exact same thing you're talking about. People in humanitarian disaster response space or whatever are talking about making a map. They default to drones, and it's a circumstance where they probably should be looking at either a manned aircraft or a satellite. It'll be easier, it'll be cheaper, it won't take 15 years. So yeah, really getting a sense of when the drone makes sense and when it really doesn't is important.
Okay, does anyone have any questions on that topic? I'd like to, thank our panelists. I really enjoyed getting asked those questions. It was really fun. We're going to hang out and ask you to bring your questions up, and we want to thank you for coming out to our panel discussion. I had a good time. If you have questions, please come up.
All right. Well, morning, everybody. Welcome to Las Vegas and InterDrone 2019. Thanks for joining us. I know it's early in the morning, and we appreciate you taking the time. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about a challenge that many companies are dealing with today, which is how do you effectively apply drone technology to solve business challenges at scale and remain effective. Now that applies both to companies that want to completely insource and have their own people flying drones, as well as those that want to outsource the entire operation, and those that want to take a hybrid approach. And that also applies as well to drone-specific companies that have had early successes with a couple of large customers, and then now see other customers that they have that they would like to grow, and you wonder, well, how do I take you from a few gigabytes of data that I'm collecting for you to terabytes, or how do I take you from 3 to 5 pilots to dozens or even hundreds? But before we get started, I always like to gauge the audience and see what everyone's background is. So just quick show of hands, how many of you would describe yourselves as being in the drone industry? And how many of you would describe yourselves as being at a company that is using drone technology to solve business challenges? Great. And how many of you are, are applying drones internally? Have internal programs? Outsource? Sometimes it can be a mix of both.
Okay, great. Well, now that we've gotten a sense for the room a little bit, just a little bit about us. I'm Jesse Stepler. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer and Head of Product at Measure. Measure is an aerial intelligence company that provides customers with software as well as services, regardless of whether they want to insource or outsource, or what we often find is a combination of the two, a hybrid approach to applying drones to solve their challenges. I have the privilege every day. What really gets me out of bed is working with a very smart and motivated team of software developers, expert pilots, data engineers, subject matter experts, and in particular, having the opportunity to work with, in conjunction with customers and partners like AES. Today, I have the benefit of being joined by Asel Iapova of AES. Asel oversees one of the largest commercial drone programs in the world at AES, which is a global Fortune 500 energy company. Asel?
Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to see you today. Early morning session. Actually, this is my number 5 public UAV conference this year. So for this year, we share so many knowledge, our insights, experience. Yet, overall, you know that drone world is small. Mostly speakers are similar and audience are also similar. So I was thinking last night, already I see like very similar faces from last event. So I was thinking how I can make it different, this speech today. So today we have 1 hour session. To be honest, this is quite a long session. We would like to make it more interactive, more useful for you. You can get, at the end of this session, you can get some knowledge, some tips, some takeaways. When you will go back to your workplace, you can implement and think overall picture. My name is Asel. I'm a certified program manager. I'm not a drone operator, or I'm not from UAV industry or Air Force. For these 3 years of execution of the program, I can see, like, from the ground level, to bring the program to the scaling stage. This is a huge work, a lot of efforts, a lot of communications and stakeholders management. So today I'm going to share lessons learned, some insights, some challenges, some success stories, how we implemented in energy utility company in 15 countries. Next slide, please, so I can give more. You would like to share something?
Yes, and so as Asel said, we'd like to make this kind of a back and forth, so we're going to be pausing periodically to take questions. We don't just want to wait till the end. We're hoping that we can hear from a few of the audience members as well about how you're applying drones to solve your problems, and how you have dealt with challenges as you have tried to scale your own program, because I find increasingly, as this technology is adopted more and more, there's a lot of wisdom in the room. When we first started working with AES, and actually I'll quickly just back up here, just to emphasize, I think the early success that AES has had. These are figures from the first couple of years of our working with AES in 2017 and 2018. $10 million in total financial value, over 170 pilots. Now that number is well north of 200, spread across 13 countries, and 57,000 hazardous man hours avoided. And those numbers are not updated for 2019. And that last figure in particular is really what AES is focused on, and one of the reasons why we're so privileged to work with them, because they care so much about safety. When we started working with them, what we found were pockets of innovation, which is very much in AES's DNA, kind of spread throughout both the U.S. and the world, of people who went out and bought, DJI hardware, SenseFly hardware. They'd go to a dealer, they'd go to a Best Buy, and they'd start trying to solve problems in their everyday responsibilities with the technology. Much of this was being managed on Excel spreadsheets. There was no real way to track return on investment, but there was real innovation happening, and AES wanted to take it to the next step and really build a foundation to have a successful program at scale with demonstrable return on investment. Estelle, maybe you could give us a little bit of the history of the AES drone program and how you scaled to over 200 pilots.
Before I will move to background and current status, I would like to share that in 2018 and 19, AES Global Drone Program awarded win second place after NASA for implementation of UAV technologies for improvement of operations and safety. Also, we are in top 5 companies in the world with leading UAV programs and scale, very mature projects. Also, we are in different reports, annual reports, and magazine interviews everywhere. So very proud to share, but it's very important part to be with you, with industry level stakeholders, with end users and the industry experts. This is great opportunity, this type of meetings, to share experience, to know each other. This industry is growing, still in the scaling stage, not very mature industry. So in each industry, for example, in energy, agriculture, or other different industries, different level of maturity of the program. So in the energy industry, especially in utility companies, last 2-3 years, everybody started to think and bring more, wider strategy and implementation. So I would like to say that in 2014, 15, AES started to think about using different new technologies to improve safety first. So we didn't think about financial benefits, other benefits, just increase safety. You know that energy companies, especially utility businesses, they're high risk of failing from the height or to be burned or energized lines, a lot of risks in energy industry. So it was the first tools our businesses, we have right now more than 110 power plants in different applications. We have all verticals. For example, thermal businesses, coal and gas, utility businesses, transmission and distribution lines. We have hydro businesses, we have wind and solar. So all types of verticals we have in 14 countries, and totally 110 businesses right now. So also different cultural issues, standards, legislation, a lot of factors there to scale this type of program from the ground. So our businesses in Europe, in South America, and US, they started testing and they were learning about drones by themselves, like a hobby. We had some hobbyists in our company just testing their skills. And then I can divide these 5 big milestones into 3 big phases of implementation. First is research and development, testing, we can say that experimentation stage. Second is implementation stage. And third is scaling stage. So 2017, we say that this is experiment. 2018, implementation stage. 19 is scaling stage. We are at the end of scaling stage. We have number 4 phase. We can say they are more high intelligence, software, artificial intelligence. They're more mature digital projects there. So number 4 is 2020. We are moving towards to AI projects.
So, Asel, could you also share with us some of the, along the way, I think that there are, stakeholder engagement in particular is very important. Communication, tracking, and in particular, kind of tracking, key performance indicators. Could you share with us a little bit about why AES prioritizes things like safety and communication, and why these key performance indicators are so important?
I would like to go here just to see in one level. I don't want to be in upper level. So if we will come to communications, it's better to be in one level with all stakeholders. Very important part, we are not doing inspections using drones just for fun. Increasing safety is obvious. It's a very useful tool. We are avoiding hazardous work. Second part, of course, improvement of efficiency. Everybody is looking to increase profit and decrease expenses. So this is, we have proved concepts and we have proved cases for each vertical, in which case high profitability, in which case financially, in which case safety. So I would like to share in this slide is very important part. You can see goals, teams, and technology. This is in each project program, I think this is major part. And so here I would like to share my insights and lessons learned and some challenges in real life when you are trying to scale, implement programs. For example, okay, in safety, why it's very important? We are improving safety. We are increasing talents, capabilities, their new skills. Also, we are saving costs and production improvement. Here, this is key indicators of the success of the program, how we can count safety, cost savings. Here, last year, we had 2 types of cost savings. First was cost savings, like avoided man hours, spending at the site, and avoidant costs of materials, for example, scaffolding. We are not using, for example, tracks. So this cost saving, we had real hard savings. And then we had revenue enhancement. For example, by using drones, we are improving our efficiency by avoiding future failures. We are avoiding failures by doing more frequent inspections and high quality inspections. So we had 2 types of cost savings last year. This year, we came up with 4 types of benefits, financial benefits. First is materials and man hours, cost savings. It's hard saving in budget. We can track. Second is, we call it soft saving also, avoidant expenses, avoided expenses. So we avoided expenses of people, for example, some materials, we can call this avoided expenses. If we didn't do inspections with drones, with manual inspections, how much we could spend. So this amount. Third type of inspections, loss of profit, loss, not expense loss, profit loss, avoidance of profit loss. So if we don't do these inspections with drones, with high quality and more frequent inspections, we could miss some risks. Proactively, we couldn't manage, and we couldn't maintain these damages in early stage with early expenses, with low expenses. So we started tracking how much we could spend if some risk happens in the future by not knowing this risk. So this is a very big amount, actually. For example, in boilers or somewhere, some cracks in the wind blades, wind turbine blades, there, if we miss some like very important crack, this is like, if we do with manual or even we do with drones, not very, very frequently, we could miss this and something can go wrong and failure, and then we will stop the power plant, and then 5 days for maintenance, maybe 1 week. This period, we will lose our profit. So this is the third type. Fourth type is revenue enhancement. Revenue enhancement, by doing these improvements, we are improving efficiency. Like this is like positive side. We are not avoiding losses, we are improving efficiency. By, for example, by doing some inspections, we could have additional megawatts, or we can do, for example, I will share one case. For example, our drone team in Brazil, in Chile, they created a drone. They have implemented some tools, tree trimming tools. They built these tree trimming tools to the drone, and they started testing, and it works. And they can do tree trimming right now in energized lines. So they are not shutting down energized lines. They are doing proactive tree trimming operations. So they are improving their annual shutdown period. So this is revenue enhancement. So there are a lot of key indicators, but the major, you know that this is a people mindset, and this is all change management. We are changing our lifestyle, our operational work methods. We are changing our people mindset. When it comes to the power plants, like down, simple engineers, they see high risk in the implementation of new technologies. They're scared to lose their job tomorrow. They were comfortable doing some inspections by themselves, every day going and coming back, and you know, of 2-3 days or 5 days they can spend for solar farm inspections, some piece. They were comfortable. Now, in 1 hour, everything is inspected. These engineers, they feel that they are losing their job. So this is against to the program overall. This is like real tendency. You know, this is a real situation. So how we can prevent this, how we can engage people, how we can change their mindset. It comes from a lot of education, a lot of communications, a lot of stakeholders management in different level. For example, in our corporation in 2015-16, top management, they decided to scale, implement new technologies to improve safety and efficiency. But when it comes to the businesses, business plant managers, or technical directors of the plant, or engineers, probably they understand, maybe they don't want to understand. So this is a lot of phases of implementation, a lot of communication. So we started building our program governance. I can say that in each region, in each country, we have drone champions, drone leaders. When we started in 2017, at the beginning, I had team globally like 10-15 people. These people were mostly drone pilots, like hobbyists, and some maybe initiators from engineers. Now we have more than 600 people engaged, involved in the program. We have totally 12,000 people, so 600, you can count like almost 5% we have engaged in global drone program. How we achieve this in like 1.5-2 years? By building, engaging high-level managers, executive leaders of the region, and the business leaders, power plant managers, and then from each power plant, drone champions, and then drone pilots. So this is a 5-level structure. I have for each region global drone leaders, I call them, Also for supporting these leaders, we have built and agreed drone sponsors. So each drone leader in for example, South America, they are covering 6 countries. South America drone leader has South America president supporting as a sponsor. If we will come to Chile and Brazil, we have drone champion. We call them the champions from each country. We have for Brazil market leaders sponsoring this person. So they have matched sponsors, and these people have power when they would like to implement and push the program. So finally, I would like to say that for each vertical, we have complex structure in the program. So I have divided also by vertical. For example, coal plants. We have 38 power plants, coal and gas plants globally. I put all these coal plants champions and sponsors and power plant managers together. We have monthly educational call sessions. So just use cases, just different technologies, sometimes vendors invited to this call. We call it, for example, global thermal call. All this engaged starting from pilots, ending with sponsors. Everybody is participating in that global Skype call. I'm recording this call also, and we are sharing in Teams environment these records. So each month, thermal, hydro calls for hydro-specific technologies, for example, submersibles, underwater robotics, different other types, Q-boats. For hydro, for example, for utility businesses, this is different. Also technologies, just aerial drones, also there are different other robotics can be used. So right now we have in our program almost like 30 different types of technology, starting from aerial drones, robotics, and submersibles. And then pilots, we have started from like 10, 15 pilots. Right now globally we have 230 pilots. They're our engineers, day-to-day engineers. They are just added the new skill. They got a certification, they have a training, and they're just using their skills day-to-day inspections. We have hybrid program. So mostly for simple inspections, our pilots, internal pilots doing their inspections. For more complex program inspections, we are asking to other different vendors for different types of inspections. When we started the program, we had around maybe 10, 15 use cases. Right now we have almost like 130 use cases, like tested, proved concept, and we have already like success stories. We are sharing this in monthly calls, and other businesses. For example, if we tested something in US, for example, with Gecko Robotics, we have success story in boiler tube inspections. This is one of the high efficient financially use case, I can say. So before we were spending almost like 1 million. Now we are spending 200,000. In one boiler, you can save like $800,000. So this is huge amount. When you, right now, we started, for example, from Warrior and US power plant as a testimonial 2016. Actually, this technology was tested and implemented in our power plant. So our engineers, they are very open to innovation, and they were bringing Gecko Robotics. They didn't have specific tube inspections. They were doing for oil and gas companies. They didn't have specific robotics sensors. They have created, developed, tested. In 2017, we had success story. And then now we are implementing more than like 10, 15 power plants using right now. You can count benefits. So 10 million, when you can see 2018 savings, now this year we are expecting to double that numbers, like hard cost savings, almost no included revenue enhancement. So this is our story. I can give some examples, or you can ask some questions. If you're a representative from this type of vertical companies or any about scaling, about building governance team, and some challenges, how to build these communications. I can see a lot of channels of communications we are using in our program, like 7 different types of communications. People should see every week something about your program. So about technology, about success story, mostly positive information, educational, how it was done, some people engaged, somebody was trained somewhere, some pictures from training, some testimonials successfully. So we have weekly newsletter in the inside of corporation, global corporate newsletter. So we have one section called drone and robotics. So this was my, I can say one of the achievements that we worked with corporate communications team to include in their newsletter one section called drone and robotics. So everybody can see how it's important. So if every week they see something, it comes to their heart, to their mind, and they want to be part of this, They want to be next week in that picture. So this is a lot of engagement ways. Weekly newsletters, monthly newsletters. I have monthly drone and robotics newsletters separate, sending to these 600 people, including all presidents, CEO, and drone champions. Also, we have social media area, so we have very often UAV programs, communications, Teams environment. We have SharePoint website and Teams site for these global teams, everybody actively using. We have for each SBU pages, everybody sharing, asking each other, for very interactive. And so this is our major tools, what we are using right now to engage people. Yes? Actually, it's a very good question. We are not counting by pilot because we use like 40%, I can say 50% outsourced services. For example, for robotics inspection, our people, they don't do this robotic inspection. This company crews, they come for 2 days, they do all inspections. For example, with boiler inspection with drones, also very experienced pilots from Measure, for example, come to our boilers, they prepare safety, everything, and just these complex inspections. For example, for US wind and solar, also we have, for example, in all our 12 wind sites, or like 30 solar sites in US, we have 5 people, just operational people sitting in the room, just managing all this. So we don't have enough pilots, just piloting going. So for this, like almost 100%, we are outsourcing to Measure.
So yeah, then, and just to add to that, I'm gonna hop ahead to a slide we have here on insourcing versus outsourcing. AES's program is very much a hybrid and one that has had great success in both enabling employees who have 9 other jobs, and number 10 is occasionally flying a drone, and then also tapping into a company like Measure that can perform, detailed wind turbine inspections or do boiler inspections or other very complex, either high risk or high complexity data products that AES would like to outsource. So what we have done over the last couple of years is both equipped AES employees with the training, the hardware, and the software to create value with drones themselves, as well as enabling AES to access outsourced services when necessary. So AES hasn't gone out and hired drone-specific pilots. In fact, what they've done is they've married the technical expertise of their people with application-specific drone training. And this is kind of a frequent question that we walk a lot of companies through, and I think it's an important one that you should periodically ask, no matter if you've made a decision to completely in-house or completely outsource or a mixture. Understanding your risk profile, understanding the predictability of demand for aerial intelligence, the complexity of doing so, the expense of the hardware, et cetera. Yes?
Very good question. We will have plenty slides about that, data analytics and AI at the end. So we would like, before we will move to data, I would like, because at the beginning, major slides are mine, and then Jesse will be talking about data analytics and building software. So in our program, I can say, you know everybody. So we are collecting thousands and thousands of pictures. If we will have like chaotic way in different places and we will use them like after 1 week after collection of this data, it will not work. Everybody should use data on time, make decision on time, and we should sort in the right way. We should have chronology. We should systemize for different stakeholders. Everybody should have access. This is a need of each program. So after building the governance, all communications, when everybody engaged, we have so many hardware investments, for example, and then we have trained people. After that, what we have to do? We have to have platform where we will store all data. It should be protected. It should be systemized in the right way. It should give to us on time, very fast, in systemized way. We should be able to capture, to find whatever we want. We should have historical, our performance indicators also. We can, this is a very good tool. So this is a second, like third phase of the program. We started development of this platform again with Measure. They are a service company, but they are not software company. So they hired other professional companies. And then we built this program, this platform since 2017, January. And at the end of the 2017, we had simple platform. He will share with insights. He will show some videos. Now, 2018, 2019, we have right now more mature level of analytical side. So we are moving forward to AI side. So we have one success story in AI with Google, with Measure. We were presenting that project as a first success project in energy in Google Next conference in front of 35,000 people just 2-3 months ago. So this is, we can say that we are moving forward, a lot of interesting ideas, a lot of interesting, challenging projects are coming. This is very important part. I would like to ask audience if you have any questions, challenges, since we have another 25 minutes, enough time. So I would like to know some of your challenges, maybe some questions in scaling of drone program. For me, it's interesting because I'm meeting some colleagues in the industry. We are sharing our insights. Sometimes I can share some best practices, somebody doing something else. So it's very interesting always. So we can spend another 5 minutes. If somebody has already scaled, implemented drone program in your company, you can introduce yourself and you can say in which level you are and your best practices, like something like you are proud of. Do we have somebody? Yes.
Sorry, just repeating the question for the record. So the question was about the need to scale, the desire to scale a program, and to track compliance, performance, et cetera. But the challenges associated with data security in particular, and DJI equipment and most software platforms being built in particular to work with DJI equipment.
You can answer in few words. We will move forward. So I can just add here one short answer. That's why we started building our own platform, not to depend from specific equipment, software platforms or different. There are so many types. We wanted to have centralized one place where we can collect everything. So this is our end user's perspective. You can share something.
It's a question a lot of companies, especially in critical infrastructure, are dealing with today. And it's a challenge in the industry. The reality is DJI has approximately 75% of the market share, and they're the only company with hot product lines. Everyone else
all the other hardware manufacturers out there have at most 1 or 2%. AES uses a variety of DJI equipment as well as other aircraft like SenseFly and other fixed-wing aircraft, but I have yet to find really a, there are some other solutions out there, but in terms of usability, affordability, and reliability, it is a challenge to find alternatives today. And I think the approach that we have taken is to build a platform that is designed to basically stand between DJI hardware and firmware and any uploads to the cloud. A platform that is hosted in the United States that we check for data security ourselves and run our own diagnostics on. Until you have airborne LTE, until you have connected drones, we are comfortable based on our understanding of FedRAMP requirements, which are still around the technology, which are still developing, that the software tools that we've come up with, that we've built in conjunction with AES, meet those requirements and address data security. But it is a question that I think every company from its own risk tolerance has to assess internally. And the reality, it's a really good question to ask, and there are not necessarily any easy answers right now. I think if you can see from the variety of applications here, this is something that AES has had to address early on because of the variety of applications. I mean, how many folks in here use basic manual annotation software for individual images? Show of hands. How many of you rely on photogrammetry tools like Pix4D, context capture? So, what's amazing is at last count when I looked at it, there are a few hundred products available that are built on a variety of different, computer vision-based photogrammetry engines. And it's really challenging to find a common platform across multiple applications. We, at Measure, we still specialize in, when we're for our own pilots where we have a lot of compliance, we ship SD cards in some cases. We'll FedEx them from around the country within 24 hours so that our data engineering team can use desktop processing software because it's faster. Now, sometimes you can have a laptop on site, and if you have a person who's trained to do that, or at least to quality control the data, that can help you as well, because you don't want to have that person, the pilot, leave the site and then realize that they had, a blank section. I'm sure that's something that you've seen as well. So, to me, it's kind of it's a question of triage. How much processing can you do? As the sexy term is on the edge. I like to just say, how much processing can you do on site? Right, to either complete the product or at least do a check, and then how quickly can you get the data either to an office where it can be processed on a desktop or into the cloud for processing. And we do a mix of both. I hate to give there's no easy answers in a row, but it's a variety of tools that we use. And I think it's a lot of it also comes down to workflow as well. Capabilities and your people's capabilities, and what's your workflow and what's the turnaround time required?
So I see a lot of questions related to software. We can move to interesting part. Before, we will have something, share best practices in your internal drone programs, or some challenges you are facing in building governance system. Last question, and then we will move to software.
So the question was in terms of both legal as well as internal compliance. Who's in charge of monitoring that?
Yeah, in our case, drone pilots, they're engineers, day-to-day engineers doing inspections. They don't think too much about assets and long-term, like these risks. So we have higher-level asset managers and planning team managers appointed as drone champions and drone leaders. So they are responsible for tracking assets, security issues, insurance, hardware, and so in software data. So overall, the higher-level drone champions. So we can move. We have 15 minutes. We have very interesting videos. We can share our interface of software so you can see how it works.
Yeah, and we've already spoken to this a little bit, so I'll just walk through a few slides in short order. Again,
the focus on the data is incredibly important. And in particular, what we have found, the first challenges that we solved for at Measure, the first challenges that we identified with customers like AES, we weren't looking to completely automate image analysis or fully integrate photogrammetry into the platform a couple of years ago. We were trying to solve more basic problems that were much more pressing for us, which is how do you manage all of the data? And specifically, how do you tag it with metadata so that you have the right organization, right? You know that this image applied to this wind turbine, blade number 2 on the trailing edge, so that if there is damage that needs to be acted on, you're not lost in a sea of data trying to figure out, okay, how do I actually take action on this? So sorting the data is incredibly important. And then the reporting function for a lot of customers. There are all kinds of very, very slick platforms out there, and we like to think that ours looks great as well. But ultimately, all the you can have fantastic user interfaces. A lot of customers simply put want PDF reports. Some of you want to ingest the data into your existing geographic information system, even though that might not necessarily include full 3D visualization tools. It might not have everything that we would want to display the data. But at scale, when you're talking about having thousands of employees that potentially one day you want to be looking at this data, you want a lot of companies we find still say we are used to data in this format. If you want to make it work not just for a few people at our enterprise, but across the entire thing, it has to be in a format that they understand today, that doesn't become a headache, and potentially you have to make it work with existing systems. Again, we talked about this before. There's an incredible variety of data products out there. And photogrammetry is largely becoming, basic photogrammetry is becoming a commodity, but it's really increasingly about how do you apply it, right? So are you using it for shading analysis? Are you using it for for construction planning, for topography? Are you doing manual annotation of data? And how are you encouraging collaboration with those data products as well? I'll move past training, but just a quick note on this. We believe in particular hands-on training is critical. And Part 107 is a nice barrier just to see who's actually among your employees incentivized enough to go out and just study for and pass the test, so that you can then schedule them for training, so you don't waste money setting up courses for folks that just simply put are not going to be interested and are not going to be invested. And then making sure that training is application specific as well, right? You want people to fly safe first and foremost, but you also want to make sure that the training that they're going through is really specific to the kinds of challenges that you're trying to solve. Moving on to how once you've started training people, and sometimes before then you want to do this as well, because you might be training them on specific compliance software, specific flight and data capture software, as well as specific data analysis software. You're going to want to streamline operations, and this is a workflow that we've kind of refined over the last 5 years at Measure, and this is what we really believe the future is for the next few years when it comes to commercial drones. Focus on workflow. Configurable workflows to your own business processes, and integration with your existing systems as well. So being able to go from the point of order, it could be internally, one employee saying to another halfway across the country, I need data on this asset, or ordering from an external provider, checking airspace services for compliance, making sure that you are managing all of your own assets, or making sure that the contractors that are flying around your infrastructure, your property, are doing so in a compliant fashion. Flight planning tools, web-based flight planning, so that if you do have data analysts, GIS analysts in-house, that you can potentially give them a seat at the table saying, this is the data product I need to create. How do I make sure the pilot in the field is doing that? Integration, as we discussed earlier, into existing visualization and analysis tools. The drone industry isn't going to completely supplant companies like Esri and ArcGIS. We have to figure out how to work more closely with them, how to work better with those products.
I would like to add here, all these phases you can see in green, and at the beginning, overall, all phases we have completed, and now we are in data processing and analysis and data integration phase right now. We are working very hard in integration with SAP. So major aim is our asset management team, our planners. When they are planning their budget for next year for inspections or for maintenance, they should know exactly what type of information is basis to plan. So all this cycle is very important. Engage different people in each phases. So right now, as a pilot project, we are integrating wind sites in US with SAP. So measure ground control from the planning stage, mapping, collection information, and the workflow with analysis. And then this information goes to our asset management platform and then to SAP. So this whole cycle we are connecting. Major aim is as a second stage to add artificial intelligence for wind. Also we are doing as a pilot project in US. So we are adding AI, and then it will be automatically collecting information, going, and just high-level risky damages after 5 and 4 going to SAP work order, and then to our purchase department information. So this whole cycle we are integrating. In October, we will be this project will be completed. Right now on track, everything going smooth. So we are going to introduce to our global team and then launch globally for other verticals.
So
also.
this for us, we believe is a holy grail. You have existing systems in place for ordering services, for requesting inspections, and for taking actions. We want full integration into that process, and this is the last kind of hurdle to get there, right? So now you have an asset manager who can request an inspection, right, see the progress of it being performed, actually get the analyzed data, and then be looking at an individual image of, say, a class 5 damage. And what we wanted to be able to do was, within the asset management platform, have that full cycle complete, so they can record an action, and you know that this was actually something that was decided upon. No, push this 6 months. Let's take a look at this in 6 months, or no, that constitutes an immediate truck roll. Tying that together, closing that loop, we believe is critical. Asel mentioned that that Measure's software platform, ground control, is what we're building and integrating into SAP. I'm going to play a quick video just to give you an idea of why we believe that's so important.
We have last 7 minutes. We have very nice 2 videos to share with you. So it will be dessert before you will leave.
set out to do was take the drone in the field and all the data it generates, and in particular, the telemetry, pilot notes, the imagery collected, and turn it into a true extension of enterprise business processes. And of course, as we mentioned before, one other thing that is important, and we brought up AI and machine learning was asked about before. We're also trying to solve problems there. Now, this is not going to happen overnight. A lot of manual analysis is still required, but what we're trying to do is reduce the amount of imagery that has to be manually reviewed by valuable employees so that they can really focus on evaluating key problems.
Global warming is one of the big challenges of our times, if not the biggest challenge of our times. Now, we really do have the technology to address the issue of carbon footprint greenhouse gases from the electric sector. The ACE Corporation is one of the leaders in new technologies for renewables and energy storage. It's a Fortune 500 company. Our mission is accelerating a safer and greener energy future.
Right now we have around 8 wind farms. Each farm has different capacity, starting from 50 turbines up to 300 turbines.
They cover large spans of geography and land. They're spread across hilltops and mountainsides.
All these turbines need annual inspections. Originally, it could take up to 2 weeks to do one inspection. We partnered with leading drone service company Measure. Right now, with drones, we can do it in 2 days. And this is safe and quick.
For a wind turbine inspection, we go out with our pilots, and what we're looking for is cracks or defects, things that may need to be repaired.
On a typical inspection, we're coming back with 30,000 images. Spending 4 weeks reviewing images, I don't think anyone's going to argue that that's the best use of a highly trained engineer's time.
How do we speed that up, and how do we make it 10x more efficient? That's where machine learning and AI comes in.
We've built a great end-to-end solution using Google Cloud's tools and platform. With the AutoML Vision tool, we've trained it to detect damage. We're able to eliminate approximately half of the images from needing human review. The remaining 50% of their time can now be very focused on identifying that damage and really determining the right course of action to remediate it. Moving from reviewing images to training machine learning models, it's a much higher order employment opportunity for people, and one where we're trying to develop our team. Google Cloud has been a great partner. Their technology is consistently among the world leaders, and they're just a great partner to work with person to person. At the end of the day, we won't reach the cleaner energy future without advanced tools like machine learning.
Technology will allow renewable energy to be cheaper than conventional energy. Artificial intelligence, robotics, this is really what the future's all about.
All right, and with that, we've got a couple minutes left. So we'll take a few questions, and of course we'll be available afterwards to answer any more. Yes. Yes, today what would be great in particular would be I actually see a lot of the potential today would be around real-time modeling that allowed you to do a better capture, right? I don't necessarily need to know what the end analysis is going to be, but I would like to know more about the sensor and where it is in the world in relation to the object. This is how we inspect wind turbines today with LiDAR, right? But could we use CV to improve on that? So one, to verify that the data that's been collected, and this is some of the stuff that we're working on today as well, to improve even more the QA, QC just on the raw data, and two, to have a better flight path around the infrastructure that you're inspecting. And then three, ultimately, yes, onboard processing when it comes to doing a solar farm inspection so that you know, hey, that right there is a hotspot, that's a dead panel. Ultimately very valuable, but I think that's a problem of a larger magnitude, and there's lower hanging fruit for us. Yes?
This is almost time. All questions were open to discuss. Before we will wrap up, we would like to thank you for your attention, for your time, and also what is next? Next in our program, as you can see, AI, implementation of integrations, and then global standard implementation.
So for UAV, right now we have safety operation standard globally. We are building governance and global UAV governance standard, and then implementation is in the next 3 months. So this is our site. Thanks, Jesse, for your information and for your attention. See you next time. And if you have any representatives from vendors for different types of technologies useful for energy and utility businesses, please come see us. I will be here till end of this day. So we are looking for different type of applications and use cases also.
Thank you very much.